Chu Wu, Manhwa Recap starts now. Do you know that there's something in this world that lingers inside of us, but on one particular day, it suddenly leaves, only to quickly return. But just when it comes back, he'll pass through a door and then... He is a food delivery guy. His last name is Zhang and his first name is Explode. He just turned 18 this year. He is very fortunate to have obtained this valuable job at such a young age, which allows for diverse social experiences and great physical exercise. In his opinion, as long as each order can be delivered on time and receive a 5-star rating, he is very satisfied. However, the world is unpredictable, and even if the delivery is on time, there are always people who like to use complaints to bully others. Fortunately, Zhang Explode has honed his communication skills and apologized profusely with nods and bows. Most customers won't dwell on it too much, especially on a rainy day like today. So Zhang Explode thinks that delivering takeout is not something that just anyone can do. After all, where can you find someone who is as excellent and adaptable as yourself? Of course, it's impossible not to have a temper. At most, it's just venting frustration silently. "Hey, where's my straw? Oh, I forgot, sorry." Sigh. With a sigh, when he finished the last order, it was already late at night. But at this time, there are still many colleagues fighting to take orders. Zhang Explode accidentally heard the uncle next to him say that there is an order he doesn't really want to deliver. Because the customer asked him to also deliver 2 buckets of 5-liter water, isn't this obviously making it difficult for people? Moreover, this order only gives a tip of 10 yuan. Isn't it irritating, right? Haha. You are so picky in this job. You complain about 10 yuan. Since you don't want to accept it, then I won't be polite either. Zhang Explode immediately took out his phone and accepted the order as soon as he heard it. The customer's residential area seems to be quite upscale. Even delivering takeout requires registration. However, when Zhang Explode entered, the 2 security guards frowned. 9 Building 1801, isn't that right? If I remember correctly, there should be no one living on this floor. Because according to their records, as early as a dozen years ago, the entire 18th floor of Building 9 was bought by an owner and transformed into a Yin dwelling. It is said that after the transformation was completed, all the doors and windows of the rooms on that floor were sealed with concrete, leaving only one entrance for worship. When it comes to this, the 2 security guards even curse shameless. Because even now, the property management dares not inform the other owners in the community about this matter. So the delivery guy who was here just now probably got the wrong address, right? Actually, Zhang Explode did indeed get it wrong. The refraction of the rain made him mistakenly see the number 6 as 8. Upon exiting the elevator, he immediately felt that something was amiss. When Zhang Explode followed the door numbers and found 1801, he only realized that the door to that room was slightly ajar when he knocked on it. He subconsciously prepared to push the door open and greet. The scene in the room scared him so much that his soul almost left his body. He saw that the room was densely packed with corpses, as if it was a large crime scene. And in those piles of bodies, there were 2 shiny golden objects. Zhang Explode felt his hair stand on end in horror. He staggered as he ran out wildly. His instinct told him he must rush downstairs as soon as possible to tell the security guard about this. He took advantage of the wait for the elevator. He also hurriedly pressed 110. But strangely, there was no signal on this floor. But just then, he clearly heard a teenager's cry for help. "Help me!" Delivery guy Zhang Explode delivering water on a rainy night. However, he barged into a Yin dwelling because he had mistakenly read the address. At the moment when he pushed open the door, a strong bloody smell hit him in the face, and the room was not only filled with bloodstains, but also lying in all directions were many corpses. Terrified, Zhang Explode ran away, wanting to quickly escape downstairs to inform the security guard about the situation. While waiting for the elevator, he also dialed the emergency number. Strangely, there was no signal on this floor. Fearful and helpless, he could only hope that the elevator would come quickly. But just then, he heard a clear cry for help from the room where the accident happened. Was someone still alive? Who would dare to enter such a place? On the other side, the elevator was about to arrive. The rolling numbers seemed to have made a choice for him. Zhang Explode repeated, "I'm sorry," in his mind. It's not that he didn't want to save the person, but he was too afraid to do so. After all, he was just a small delivery driver. However, just as the light from the elevator shone on his face for a moment, he, however, didn't hesitate and dashed back. At that moment, Zhang Explode's obsession took the upper hand. He wants to save this child, even if it means risking his own life. He returned to the room once again, only to realize upon entering that the cries for help were still coming from the inner room. The door to the inner room was also slightly ajar, shimmering with a crimson hue. Although Zhang Explode was very scared, he did not hesitate at all, but carefully stepped over the corpse to reach the door. What he did not expect was to see a bright red coffin in front of him. Could it be? Is the child inside this coffin? He leaned out to look and vaguely saw a pale hand weakly waving. Zhang Explode unconsciously moved the coffin lid aside to take a closer look. He then realized that the young man calling out to him was probably no longer human. It was at that moment that he felt as if he was in the midst of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. A bone-chilling coldness climbed up his spine. Zhang Explode panicked and ran in desperation, but as soon as he stepped out of the inner room, he saw a group of black-clothed figures rushing into the room. They identified themselves as police and demanded to know what Zhang Explode had done. Zhang Explode was shocked and panicked. Without much thought, he quickly explained that he was just delivering takeout and hadn't done anything else. As for why he entered the room, it was because he heard a child in distress in the inner room. Saying this, he turned his head and pointed in that direction, trying hard to explain. But just at that moment, a black hand suddenly reached out. Click! The sound of a neck snapping could be heard. Our protagonist, actually. Without warning, for no reason, the leader in black twisted Zhang Explode's neck directly. He flipped over Zhang Explode's body with his foot, and found the gold brick that was underneath. Perhaps the man in black knew it was just a coincidence, but he still sighed, saying, "People die for wealth." He waved his hand and ordered his men to clean up the scene. Then he walked into the room that Zhang Explode had mentioned. However, it's strange that the man in black's phone actually has a signal. He dialed his big brother's number and said he had found the legendary The Nether Gate, but he did not know if he noticed a bloody golden needle next to the coffin. At this moment, Zhang Explode still had a faint consciousness. He knew his current situation, but he couldn't feel his body at all. He wanted to question what these black-clad individuals were up to, but no matter how hard he tried, the voice remained barely audible. Then everything went black before his eyes. In the moment, he was being put into a black bag. Some images suddenly flashed before his eyes. It seemed to be some of the things he had experienced over the years. Just that. The sequence of events appeared to be in reverse. Until this moment, Zhang Explode finally understood that at the moment of death, one truly can see one's entire life. In the end, the scene froze on a photo of him with a man and a woman. Zhang Explode died. But just moments later, he woke up. What is different this time is that Zhang Explode's pupils are blue. He didn't understand what had happened. He wanted to stand up to get a clearer look. But strangely, no matter how he struggled, he couldn't sit up, not even move a bit. This feeling seems to only occur during childhood, when experiencing ghosts pressing the bed, which is medically known as sleep paralysis. Just as he was terrified, a sudden sound of footsteps rang out. He glanced sideways and immediately discovered a pair of large feet next to his ear. And beside him, it seemed that there were countless such big feet, but for some reason, He could only see the lower legs of these people. Above that was darkness. Zhang Explode was just attacked by a stranger in black and killed. He suddenly inexplicably came back to life. However, at this moment, he couldn't move and could only watch countless pale big feet approaching step by step. They surrounded Zhang Explode, shouting non-stop, "Open the door! Open the door! Open the door! Open the door!" He did not understand the true meaning of "Open the door!" but he could clearly feel a breathtaking heat. He watched helplessly as his gloves were reduced to ashes. Next, it was his skin on his hands. The intense burning sensation jolted Zhang Explode awake, only to realize that he was actually in a small space engulfed in flames. In reality, he had been thrown into a crematorium and was being roasted alive by the flames. At this moment, outside the crematorium sat a caretaker, bowing his head as if lost in thought. However, Zhang Explode's roar startled him, causing him to turn around in disbelief at the crematorium behind him. Because the pile of bodies brought in today are all long cold, how could there possibly be a living person among them? Just as he blanked out for a moment, a big red hand suddenly reached out. Immediately, a black man, already burnt to charcoal on the outside, crawled out. This scene frightened the old man on duty greatly. He shouted, "Corpse awakening!" and then rushed out of the door. However, he did not actually escape, but went to get help. Because he knew that the bodies delivered today were all quite significant. Even if one ran away, he could not bear the responsibility. However, it was not until they burst into the room with their weapons drawn that they discovered it was already empty. How could it be possible? Could someone escape even after being burned like that? But at this moment, Zhang Explode had indeed escaped. Outside the crematorium was a dense forest, with charred skin peeling off in the wind. Zhang Explode looked in horror at his hand that was recovering. He even tripped over as a result, but he couldn't feel any pain. He still couldn't figure out what exactly he had encountered today. Because in his memory, he was strangled by a person in black. And just now, he was thrown into the incinerator. Logically speaking, he should have been dead by now. So why did it turn out like this? Anything else? What are those pale big feet exactly? Why are they yelling for me to open the door for them? Could it be that they have a key on them? He was puzzled, not knowing that just as he was puzzled, the person in black who broke his neck had already arrived at a warehouse. From far away, he shouted towards a little bearded man holding a folding fan. "Brother, the thing you wanted has been brought." He then vividly described the scene of some henchman suddenly going crazy after opening the coffin. He delusionally hoped to praise the big brother's foresight by doing so. In addition, he also said that those bodies have all been sent to the crematorium and disposed of, which will not affect the Yin dwelling on that floor. Shao, who listened expressionlessly, then ordered his men to open the coffin on the spot. After opening the coffin, the men in black clearly felt a sudden chill emanating from their leader. The leader clenched his teeth and angrily asked, "Where is the thing inside?" The man in black hesitated at the question. "What thing? Isn't this the nether gate that you asked us to retrieve?" The man with a small beard suddenly laughed. He turned his head, held the face of the man in black pitifully, and said, "Who the hell told you that the nether gate is a coffin? Listen to me carefully. What I want is a person." The man with a small beard seemed a bit crazy. At the same time, in the dense forest outside the crematorium, Zhang Explode suddenly felt a sweetness in his throat, and a gush of blood surged from his abdomen. It was this sensation that reminded him of something all of a sudden. He remembered that after he opened the coffin, he did not run away immediately. Instead, he saw a young man, with a golden needle horizontally inserted on his head. After that, it seems like he did something, but strangely, he can't remember it now. In a moment of distraction, he suddenly coughed up a large amount of blood. And the amount of blood was so much that it could reflect his shadow. But before he could react, a bloody footprint suddenly emerged from the pool of blood. In horror, He looked up and found that countless bloody footprints had emerged from his own blood trail, appearing eerie, as if many people were walking to and fro in front of him. However, he couldn't see anyone. If getting the delivery address wrong was the beginning of Zhang Explode's path to destruction, then the blood coffin in Yin dwelling was the source of all strangeness. Even before Zhang Explode arrived, a group of black-clad people in Yin dwelling had already set their sights on that coffin. When they just opened a small crack in the coffin lid, a strong foul smell hit them, accompanied by oozing crimson blood. This sudden change naturally caught the attention of the black-clothed individuals. They even saw the eerie footprints emerging from the blood, leading to a tragedy. When people outside the room heard the commotion, they thought their comrades inside had discovered a treasure. However, those who emerged just lowered their heads and remained silent, only opening their blood-filled mouths wide when they reached the crowd. Suddenly, chaos broke out in the entire Yin dwelling. Faced with the unknown horror, some wanted to escape, but their companions guarding the door did not give them a chance to survive. Second episode, The Pursuer. So when Zhang Explode arrived here, he saw the scene of devastation throughout the house. Later, after Zhang Explode's death, a new group of black-clothed people arrived and carefully cleaned up the scene and secretly took away the blood coffin. Shortly after they left, a new guest arrived at the Yin dwelling. The newcomer was dressed in a very trendy manner. He simply sniffed the water stains on the ground and already had a rough idea. As for who cleaned up, he couldn't know because at this moment, he was more concerned about where the it that once lived in this Yin dwelling had gone. And what about this golden needle? By now, the sky had gradually darkened. Zhang Explode was running aimlessly in the dense forest outside the crematorium. He didn't know if the footprints he had seen earlier were an illusion, but at least it was fortunate that he had survived. But just then, there suddenly came a chaotic search sound from behind. Zhang Explode quickly hid behind a tree, too scared to even breathe loudly because the person chasing him was the old man from the crematorium and a group of men carrying shovels and clubs. Someone grumbled and complained to the old man, telling him to be more careful when throwing people into the furnace in the future, so as to avoid another corpse awakening incident like today. This old man's surname is Li. He firmly believes in his own eyes because when the young man was brought in, his neck was already broken. How could he still be alive? Everyone was puzzled after hearing it, and had to search harder. After all, they couldn't let today's events be known. Otherwise, their factory would have a hard time in the future. Of course, they must keep it a secret now, and not let the customers know. Zhang Explode heard the conversation of these guys clearly. The customers they were talking about. Could it be the group of black-clothed men who had pretended to be police that he encountered before? Before he could understand, a cold stick suddenly came straight at him. What a clever trick to catch one off guard. Old Li is truly cunning. After catching Zhang Explode, Old Li tightly held onto the shovel and called for his companions to come quickly. Although he was not a killer, if this child did not die today, then he and his group would not survive. But he still underestimated the young man's strength at the critical moment of life and death. Zhang Explode suddenly tightened his body and flipped forward, directly sending Old Li flying out. But as he was just about to stand up to run away, another shovel struck him on the back of the head. Zhang Explode was knocked down again. He was filled with anger, but didn't know what to say. He didn't understand what he had done wrong to deserve such treatment from heaven. Why did heaven give him a chance to live again, but also block the door to survival? Listening to Zhang Explode's roar, the group of men also felt some compassion. Seeing Zhang Explode suddenly coughing up blood, Ahao beside him couldn't help it anymore. He harbored ill intentions and suggested letting this child go. But Old Li warned him with a dark expression to think about his gambling debts carefully. Upon hearing this, the group of men who were previously chattering suddenly fell silent. Each of them has their own hardships and has no choice but to fight for survival. Thinking of this, the men no longer hesitated but, as if by mutual agreement, raised their clubs, preparing to send Zhang Explode on his final journey. Although they were forced to commit such evil deeds, they had already made up their minds to burn Joss paper for Zhang Explode after his death. However, they had not yet started. A House suddenly went crazy and swung the shovel towards his companion. Watching a fresh life vanish in an instant, the men were shocked. A House suddenly turned his head, revealing a fierce face covered in bloodstains. Old Lee didn't know why A House would do this, but he found that behind A House. Suddenly a strange bloody footprint appeared, but before he could figure out the reason, the same strange occurrence happened behind him as well. The men acted like they had gone crazy, attacking each other viciously, delivering fatal blows with every move. Old Lee panicked. He shouted for everyone to stop and take a good look at what they were doing. But no matter how much he yelled, his companions continued to turn a deaf ear, and the killing continued. It wasn't until this moment that he realized how small and helpless his voice was. But just then, he suddenly heard a faint whisper in his ear. Then, he felt an inexplicable force rushing into his mind suddenly. In the end, Old Lee was also assimilated by the mysterious force and lost consciousness, turning the scene into a complete earthly purgatory. But Zhang Explode had no reaction to it all from beginning to end, because at this moment, he was suffering from a splitting headache. Fragments flashed through his mind. It seems to be the lost parts of his memory. In those fragments, he saw the familiar blood coffin and the boy with the golden needle piercing his head. Suddenly he remembered something. He seemed to know what he did after opening the coffin. At this moment, a sudden breaking sound came rushing as if someone else had rushed over. Zhang Explode looked over at the sound, but only saw half of a robe. Soon after that, he heard a cold voice coming from behind him, saying, "Found you!" Zhang Explode is mysteriously reborn in the crematorium. Then he is hunted down by workers at the crematorium in the middle of the night. But unexpectedly, just as he was despairingly accepting his death, those workers suddenly went mad. They seemed to have lost control in an instant, starting to launch frenzied attacks on their companions. And the root of this mutation actually originated from the blood spat out by Zhang Explode. This is already the second time he has spit out blood, and each time he does, he sees many footprints walking out from his bloodstains. He doesn't understand what's going on, but he has regained some memories because of this. He remembered what he did before after opening the blood coffin. However, at this moment, the second group of pursuers arrived. Zhang Explode didn't even have time to react before his head was held down by someone. But at the critical moment, he caught a glimpse with the corner of his eye of the golden needle aimed at his temple. So he subconsciously raised his hand to block. It was precisely this block that caught the young man grabbing him off guard. And Zhang Explode took this opportunity to break free as well. A little interesting. The young man in black, Zhang Explode, who was resisting stubbornly, suddenly became playful. He dodged and maneuvered through the forest while synchronizing information with his partners. He told them in a slightly mocking tone that while he didn't find the boss in the coffin, he had discovered a fresher target. Never mind, the important thing is to focus on the task at hand, he thought to himself. The young man who was trying to evade suddenly turned around and landed a direct palm strike on Zhang Explode's chin. After that, Zhang Explode passed out. Later, he had a dream. In the dream, there was still the unforgettable blood coffin, but strangely, this time he vaguely heard the sound of a copper bell. Episode 3, Specimen, begins. Suddenly, he woke up, and Zhang Explode realized. He found himself in a strange room full of jars, and the sound of bells was still ringing randomly. It was not until this moment that he realized he was not only tied to a cross pillar, but also had something like a formation under his feet. In an instant, Zhang Explode was extremely terrified. Could it be that he had been taken as some kind of sacrifice? At this moment, a slightly mocking voice suddenly came from the side. "Wow, it's really a miracle! I didn't expect you to wake up for real. Hello!" Zhang Explode Ding Qing glanced over, and found that not far in front of him, there were 4 people playing mahjong around a table. And the person who had just greeted him was the young man in black who had caught him earlier. Zhang Explode was suddenly shocked and sweating profusely. He wanted to shout something, but he found that his mouth seemed to be stuffed with something, and there was a metal curtain hanging over his face. Watching Zhang Explode's struggling appearance, the young man in black suddenly showed kindness and walked over to help him a little. Without anything to cover him, Zhang Explode suddenly vomited, but this time he didn't cough up blood again. Instead, he vomited a pile of white grains. The young man in black told him that was glutinous rice used for detoxification. But Zhang Explode clearly was not in the mood to pay attention to this. Instead, he opened his mouth and shouted at them, saying that he hadn't done anything. He hoped that the gentleman could give him a break. In the midst of explanation, he suddenly caught sight of the red characters written all over his body. Feeling extremely terrified, he began to struggle desperately. Unexpectedly, the young man suddenly chuckled and said that the string that was tied to the bell was accidentally broken. Then this elder sister might just bury you. Hey, the elder sister is quite pretty. Upon hearing these words, Zhang Explode was shocked and also became more honest. Several people saw this kid finally becoming normal. The 4 people playing mahjong finally began to talk about serious matters. They first asked Zhang Explode his full name and why he appeared in that room last night. Zhang Explode naturally did not conceal anything and disclosed all that he saw. At this moment, the middle-aged man who had his back to him suddenly asked, "Who else is in that house besides you?" "Who else? Isn't it either yourself or those black-clothed people?" At this point, Zhang Explode suddenly felt startled. He hurriedly defended himself, saying that he did not kill those people. But as soon as he finished speaking, the cold and ruthless sister who had been silent all along suddenly glared at him with a murderous look in her eyes. Zhang suddenly got so scared that his hair stood on end. He quickly looked away and added, he also found a coffin with a teenager inside. Upon hearing this, several people fell silent, seemingly contemplating something. Suddenly, another man pointed a backbreaker 3000 that looked like a handprint at him. He asked if he had secretly taken away the coffin and the boy and hidden him. How could that be possible? He was clearly killed by a group of people in black and then sent to the crematorium. Listening to Zhang Explode's explanation, several people seemed to not doubt its authenticity because the elder sister had already conducted an investigation afterward. She found the group of men chasing after Zhang Explode. They are all workers from the nearby funeral parlor. And these people also take on some underground jobs privately, such as helping to dispose of bodies for others. Upon hearing this, the middle-aged man was puzzled. How could the underworld get involved in such things? Listening to the conversation of a few people, Zhang Explode finally understood that the gang of black-clothed men pretending to be police officers he encountered were actually members of the underworld. But before he could think further, the huge red backbreaker 3000 pointed at him again. It turned out that the man was asking him why he had offended the underworld. Zhang Explode immediately knew that he had been misunderstood again. He quickly explained that as a delivery driver, how could he possibly have offended the underworld? Upon hearing this, the young man in black suddenly frowned and said a word. It seems that those underworld people do not know that Zhang Explode is actually the target they are looking for. Just by saying so. Are the coffin and the youth taken away by those underworld people? And Zhang Explode does not know what the follow-up situation is. But from his current analysis of the situation, it does seem possible. But the middle-aged man shook his head, puzzled as he held a golden needle. Because if they were simply taking the coffin and the young man away, there would be no reason to remove this golden needle. Moreover, this kind of thing has been extinct for at least 300 to 400 years. So based on this alone, it can be analyzed that the young man in the coffin has probably been sealed for at least more than 300 years. As for why he was later dug out and sent into that Yin dwelling, it is unknown. After a few people's analysis, Zhang Explode was left confused and mystified. He had no idea what these people were talking about, just in a daze. The man's voice startled him again. He saw the man once again pointing the backbreaker 3000 at him, asking if he pulled out the golden needle. Zhang Explode was startled and subconsciously kept denying it repeatedly. But as soon as the words were spoken, he suddenly began to hesitate. Because in the fragments of memories he had previously recovered, it seemed like he had really done something. He tried hard to recall, and the image gradually became clearer. It seemed that at that time, he saw the young man with a golden needle inserted in his head, and somehow, he impulsively pulled out the golden needle. Then he saw the young man suddenly open his eyes. After that, he was so scared that he fled from the room. But now, even though Zhang Explode remembered these things, he still insisted that the golden needle was not pulled out by himself. Unexpectedly, the man didn't even think about it, and said he was lying. Could it be that Zhang Explode's expression gave himself away? But strangely, the man did not pursue it either. He instead looked serious and at the few people in front of him, saying that they must find the child in the coffin as soon as possible. Looking at a few people, he suddenly left himself aside, making Zhang Explode panic. He hurriedly asked who these people were, and why they had tied him up here. Unexpectedly, the young man in black smirked and said, "They are all experts, goddamn so-called experts. Who introduces oneself so hastily? But sometimes we have to lower our heads under the eaves." Zhang Explode had to muster up his patience, and showed his ace in the hole. He put on a pleading expression, hoping everyone would let him go. Zhang Explode also promised to keep his mouth shut, and never reveal what happened today. But unexpectedly, the young man refused without a second thought, stating that Zhang Explode was an important live specimen they had found with great difficulty. Of course, more importantly, Zhang Explode himself is very dangerous. If we release you rashly, it will inevitably bring immeasurable disasters to the outside world. Upon hearing Zhang Explode, he was immediately stunned. What kind of disaster could a simple delivery person bring to the world? Is it just adding to the workload of a position? He was very puzzled by this. But at this moment, the usually reticent older sister coldly revealed a truth to him, which is that Zhang Explode will spit out some things that do not belong to this realm. Upon hearing this, Zhang Explode was suddenly shocked, and he immediately thought of the blood footprints he had seen before. And those footprints seemed to have emerged from his own blood. Upon seeing Zhang Explode's sudden change in expression, the young man grinned and was ready to tell him about those things. But right at that moment, a crow suddenly flew in. It stopped by the middle-aged man and kept cawing loudly, saying something. After a moment, the four people who were playing mahjong stood up simultaneously because they had found the hiding place of the youth in the coffin. It was time to bring the youth back. Zhang Explode immediately panicked upon seeing the group, preparing to leave in a hurry. He shouted to the group, "Are you just going to leave like this? What about me?" Upon hearing this, the young man suddenly had a look of enlightenment and exclaimed that he nearly forgot they were still holding someone captive. Before Zhang Explode could even feel happy, the young man suddenly said a sentence. "Dongling, bury him." What? Bury him? Little did they know, when the four of them found the hiding place of the youth earlier, another group of people also found the target through some kind of bizarre means. And this group turned out to be the same gangsters from before. It seems that they are not using legitimate methods. The youth is said to be the true form of the Nether Gate, and has been sealed for 300 to 400 years. However, just yesterday, he was unintentionally rescued by Zhang Explode and escaped to an abandoned park where few people go. But he is unaware that at this moment, his hiding place has been discovered by both parties simultaneously. One of the parties even used a bizarre method. But coincidentally, Zhang Explode, who saved the teenager, also fell into a crisis episode 4, on the road. Originally, he just wanted to remind a few good men they shouldn't forget themselves before going out to do business. But unexpectedly, The young man in black who captured him grinned and signaled the older sister beside him to bury him. Zhang Explode was full of worry. Why did he have to shout at them? But once the words were spoken, Zhang Explode had no way out. The older sister named Gong Ling was already getting ready to draw her sword. Under helplessness, Zhang Explode could only plead bitterly. He said as long as they didn't kill him, he would do anything they asked. Unexpectedly, the young man suddenly smirked wickedly and said they indeed had no intention of killing him, just burying him alive for now. Zhang Explode listened to this with confusion. Bury him alive? Does that mean leaving the head exposed outside? But then Gong Ling's words directly shattered all his illusions. Because their idea of burying is actually burying their heads. Oh my goodness! What kind of releasing is this? I saw that Gong Ling's long knife had already been drawn out half an inch. Zhang Explode was suddenly so scared that he started to speak incoherently. Suddenly, he came up with an idea. So, he started to make things up, saying that he had hidden the youth away. Without him, no one would be able to find the youth. This statement did have the desired effect. The four individuals all turned around and stared at him, seemingly trying to determine the truth of his words, and also seeing how he would continue to fabricate. Only the backbreaker 3000 uncle blandly asked him where exactly he had hidden the person. Zhang Explode hurriedly said upon seeing the situation. To find the child, we have to bring ourselves along and let him lead the way personally. Upon hearing this, several people clearly showed a hint of speechless expression. And Gong Ling, the older sister, had a bad temper. She directly exposed Zhang Explode, saying that he was talking nonsense, and then immediately prepared to draw a knife to attack. Zhang Explode was finished. He wanted to cry, but had no tears left. Cold sweat was scared out of him. But what he didn't expect was that the young man in black suddenly pressed down on Gong Ling's knife handle, indicating her not to act first. He laughed and said, "What if this guy is telling the truth?" Gong Ling tilted her head in seeming confusion, but could do nothing but let him go. This made Zhang Explode, who had once again narrowly escaped death, overjoyed. He quickly said that he never lies, but his words sounded light, and no one took them seriously. And the young man, still smiling, helped him untie the rope. It seems that he really intends to take him out together. But he reminded Zhang Explode to come back with him after finding the child, and also cautioned him not to run around after going out. Although the words sounded gentle, they made him somewhat uncomfortable. And Zhang Explode also heard the implications in this guy's words, but he completely didn't take them to heart. Because at that moment, his mind was filled with thoughts of how to escape, so naturally he didn't pay attention to these. Therefore, no matter what kind of reminder, he would happily and quickly agree. However, even so, he was still shocked by the densely packed jars in the room. I wonder if those jars are filled with human heads. But before he could figure it out, Gong Ling pushed him out with a hand on his head. Upon stepping out, he realized that it was actually a cold and desolate temple here. Although the fresh outdoor air made Zhang Explode feel the long-lost freedom. But he couldn't help asking everyone what place it was. The young people grinned and said that it was Lisong Temple. Is it a very luxurious Taoist temple? Lisong Temple? Isn't this a 4B level tourist attraction? How did they bring him here? While he was lost in thought, the middle-aged man raised his hand and gestured for everyone to get ready to set off. Just then, the middle-aged man known as Backbreaker 3000 suddenly let out a lazy yawn, then turned and walked back into the house, saying he was going to take a nap. Although the young people were a bit speechless about this, they had gotten used to it. He didn't say anything, just called for Zhang Explode to join him. Later, in the conversation among several people, it was learned that this cool young man is called Xiao Yi, and the middle-aged man had no intention of accompanying them, only warning Xiao Yi not to act rashly. Zhang Explode subconsciously followed a few people forward. The feeling of steps reminded him suddenly that he was still barefoot. He quickly called everyone to stop, hoping they could get him a whole set of clothes. The three people all turned back at once, seeming quite interested in observing something. However, what can one wear in a Taoist temple? Xiao Yi casually gave him a coarse Taoist robe to make do with, and politely said to him, "Sorry for the inconvenience." But these were no longer important to Zhang Explode, for at this moment, although he was outside the Taoist temple, he had also to a certain extent regained his freedom. The next step is to show off one's intelligence and talent. He thought of this and chuckled foolishly, but he didn't have long to be complacent. A cold shout forcibly pulled him back to reality. It turned out that for this outing, he had to take a car. PepsiCo? On the car, everyone was harmonious and peaceful, as if the previous buried incident did not exist at all. Xiao Yi told him that after the car reached the foot of the mountain, Zhang Explode would be in charge of directing the route. Although Zhang Explode cheerfully agreed on the surface, his heart was actually blooming with joy. Drive? That would be even better. When the time comes, all you have to do is wait for the right moment, then push the door and jump out of the car. Run down the hill all the way. Isn't he just leaving them behind directly? Extremely clever, extremely clever. Zhang Explode is indeed proud as he thinks more about it. He has begun to survey the surrounding environment, preparing to find the opportunity in his heart. But what he didn't expect was that Sister Gongling suddenly stepped on the accelerator, and the whole car immediately accelerated. Such a sudden maneuver directly ruined Zhang's escape plan. He felt regretful, and had to hold onto the car to stabilize his body. But Xiao Yi, on the other hand, had an intoxicated expression. He seemed to really enjoy the thrill of high-speed driving. So, Zhang Explode was tossed around all the way to the downtown area. He pointed shakily at the road ahead, urging them to keep driving. Although his first plan did not work out. But once they reached the downtown area, the opportunity became even greater. For example, they can pry open the car window by that time. He shouted loudly in crowded places. And then, just casually get a few big guys to surround the car like this, wouldn't he be saved? Perfect. I really deserve it. Just as he hadn't enjoyed the moment for long, a sudden feeling of nausea came over him. Could it be that he was carsick? Reluctantly, he had to quickly ask to stop the car. Then he ran to the side and started vomiting. Gong Ling glanced at Zhang Explode's back and casually asked Xiao Yi, "Aren't you afraid he will vomit those things out?" Xiao Yi is not worried about this because the glutinous rice stuffed into that guy's mouth earlier was not in vain. Not to mention, we also have Big Sister here. What is there to be afraid of? Although Xiao Yi speaks lightly about it, Gong Ling knows what he's really thinking. Do you really expect Zhang Explode to recover and become a normal person? Xiao Yi nodded instinctively at the words. The reason he firmly believes in Zhang Explode and still sees a chance for salvation is because yesterday, after fighting with Zhang Explode, he discovered something strange. That is, Zhang Explode's body had already mutated at that time. In order to avoid uncontrollable factors later on, he was prepared to take Zhang Explode's head on the spot. But what he did not expect was that, after Zhang Explode fell to the ground, the symptoms of alienation suddenly disappeared in a moment. This situation is extremely rare, which is why he later captured Zhang Explode and brought him back to Lisong Temple. Upon hearing this, Gong Ling frowned because she knew what that kind of transformation state represented. But she didn't understand why Xiao Yi still wanted to take him out, even though he knew the guy was lying. Xiao Yi sighed deeply after hearing this, because he couldn't foresee the consequences of doing so. Anyway, he considered it as an opportunity for Zhang Explode to come out and take another look at the world. After all, this is probably his last journey in the world. At this point, Zhang Explode didn't know that his trick had already been seen through by others. He looked at the two people in the distance, who were completely defenseless, and he had already made up his mind. That's when he must seize this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So he decided to take action and immediately ran off. But to his surprise, as soon as he ran to the bus stop, he found himself facing two shiny white legs. He was so familiar with this thing that he froze on the spot as soon as he saw it appear. At this moment, Xiaoyi rushed over, patted his shoulder, indicating him to go back to the car first. Before leaving, he also looked thoughtfully towards where Zhang Explode's gaze fell. After getting back into the car, Xiaoyi suddenly stopped laughing and became serious in an instant. He said to Gong Ling, "We need to hurry." Gong Ling immediately understood and stepped on the gas pedal. So, the godly car launched into the air once again. Zhang Explode felt uncomfortable again as the guide for this trip. He knew that such speed was completely unnecessary. But Xiaoyi's words made his heart sink, because he said that Zhang Explode could rest for a while on the road ahead. As for the guide's matter, let's leave it to the navigation. Saying this, he looked up at the sky. Zhang Explode was startled, although he couldn't see anything inside the car at all. But he heard a familiar crow call. Shortly afterwards, the middle-aged man who was entertaining the crows at Lisong Temple called Xiaoyi to ask if they had found the target. At that time, Xiaoyi and the others had just gotten off the car, and as expected, Zhang Explode vomited again. Xiaoyi, on the other hand, resumed his nonchalant demeanor once again. He looked at the dilapidated park ahead and informed the uncle that their group had safely arrived at their destination. At this moment, Zhang Explode, who had recovered, finally had the opportunity to assess the situation in front of him. When he saw the words, "Southern Paradise," he was suddenly surprised because this place seemed familiar to him. Little did he know that at the moment when Zhang Explode arrived, deep in the park, a bald teenager suddenly turned his head. The appearance of Zhang Explode, a fellow like him, made him feel a hint of unease acutely. And this teenager is none other than the eldest brother in the red coffin. Though this teenager seems harmless, and has always wanted to escape the human world. But in reality, he is a gate that connects the two worlds, Hell's Gate. Like Zhang Explode, he also often coughs up blood and can regain some lost memories because of it. Only at this moment, he is hiding alone in this abandoned park, as if looking for something. Could it be that this place was the place of the teenager's misfortune 300 years ago? But at this moment, Zhang Explode, a similar person, arrives. But it made him feel a little uneasy. Episode 5, Chu Wu. In fact, Xiaoyi and the others were able to find this place thanks to the flock of crows in the sky. When Zhang Explode saw the name of this park, he suddenly felt a sense of déjà vu. But as he looked at this dilapidated and gloomy scene, he still couldn't recall where that familiar feeling came from. The desolate scenery made Zhang Explode, who was walking, suddenly feel that something was wrong. The desolate wilderness with rare human traces. They wouldn't be planning to bury him on the spot, would they? Thinking of this, Zhang Explode couldn't help but shiver. He quickly squeezed out a smile and changed the subject, asking them why they were looking for that boy. Xiaoyi explained somewhat casually. He smiled and said, "That boy is quite dangerous." Zhang Explode was also listening absent-mindedly because he was assessing the surrounding environment and looking for an escape route for himself. But just then, the bloodstains on the ground caught Xiaoyi's attention. He wiped a bit and sniffed it carefully, realizing that the boy had been here not long ago. So, the boy should have hidden himself, otherwise it wouldn't be so quiet here. Just what could possibly have attracted him to such a dilapidated park? Just as Xiaoyi was pondering, Zhang Explode suddenly exclaimed beside him. Because Zhang Explode, who was observing the surroundings, suddenly turned his head and found several large pits on the ground in front of him. Beyond the pits, there were many densely packed footprints. Seeing Zhang Explode's panicked expression, Xiaoyi immediately teased him with a smile, as if he had seen a curious little baby. He said these footprints are the same as the ones you spat out. Zhang Explode was stunned at the words, and only then realized that he seemed to have never known what these footprints were all about. At the sound of this, Gong Ling and Xiaoyi were both stunned at the same time. "Can't you see those things? Shouldn't you?" Zhang Explode was also startled by what he heard. Could it be that there are some details in these blood footprints that he hasn't noticed? Just as Xiao Yi was about to explain, Gong Ling suddenly frowned and whispered to them that someone was coming. Before long, they heard the faint roar of an engine. It turned out that the group of black-clothed men had arrived, followed by the leader of the gang. It was also because he used blood as a guide that he discovered the hiding place of the teenager. At this moment, he emotionlessly warned his henchmen, "If you can't find it, don't bother coming back." Of course, he also saw that annoying white van. It seems that some ignorant fellow arrived first. The group of henchmen in black clothes are now working much harder. As soon as they entered the park, they began searching everywhere. Under the command of the leader, they didn't even miss a small corner because they know that the boss is looking for a young boy. However, even though this apparent leader seems imposing with his bluster, inwardly he is grumbling and complaining. He resents the older brother for only saying half of the story. If he had informed them earlier that the Nether Gate was a young man, they wouldn't have been tormented like this. The key is, if you're looking for a child, just look for a child. Why the hell give him a name like the Nether Gate and make it look so creepy? However, even though he criticized in his heart, but he still honestly hid a jade Buddha under his shirt. He hopes to receive the blessing of the Bodhisattva. But just then, an unexpected incident occurred in the crowd. A young man in black with long hair suddenly heard some noise. But just then, an unexpected incident occurred in the crowd. A young man in black with long hair suddenly heard some noise. As soon as he turned his head, he froze on the spot. This unexpected incident naturally drew the attention of others. Could it be that the man with long hair failed to find his target? Just as they were surprised, a crimson blood footprint suddenly appeared in the beam of light. Then the man with long hair started talking to himself, muttering things like, "My grandson doesn't come to see me," and so on. I can't believe this roleplay is so realistic. The group of henchmen were all dumbfounded. How can this guy talk in a hoarse voice imitating an old lady's speech? But the next scene made those little brothers panic, because the man with long hair suddenly looked up and howled, revealing not only a grim face, but also saying that Grandma had returned. The leader immediately became anxious, trembling as he asked what was going on. But before he could finish his question, another little brother suddenly started convulsing, but this guy was even more eccentric. He twisted his body abnormally, saying he wanted blood for blood because over a dozen pigs in his family were poisoned to death by the village chief. After that, the village chief stopped their car and beat his whole family to death on the way to the county seat to report the incident. What's going on? Why did everyone suddenly start telling stories? The little brothers were all shocked and momentarily forgot about the search. This scene also unfolded completely in the eyes of Zhang Explode and his two companions. He looked down in shock and quietly asked, "What's happening to these people?" Unexpectedly, Xiao Yi's focus seemed to be completely elsewhere. He looked at a dark corner and softly whispered, "There's so much coming out. Did you see it?" Of course, this statement was not directed at Zhang Explode, but was said for Gong Ling, who was nearby. Actually, Gong Ling also saw it. Not far from the group of black-clad individuals, in a dark corner, there was a young man looking at them in terror. Xiao Yi rubbed his eyes and said, "Let's observe a little longer." But as soon as he finished speaking, the group of black-clad individuals suddenly became chaotic, with them gnashing their teeth and starting to attack each other. Zhang Explode was shocked to see this scene. He didn't understand what was happening to these people. Even this scene reminded him of those crematorium workers who had once chased him. Xiao Yi suddenly felt puzzled. "Can you still not see it?" Zhang Explode was taken aback at the words. "What do you see? Could it be that there is something else?" Xiao Yi, feeling somewhat helpless, pointed towards a figure in the distance for him to focus on. Zhang Explode followed the sound of Xiao Yi's voice, and indeed saw a relatively normal figure in black clothing. Behind that person, 2 lines of bloody footprints were silently creeping closer. Zhang Explode exclaimed in shock at the scene, while Xiao Yi quickly reminded him that there was more than just footprints there, but also something on top of the footprints. Zhang Explode widened his eyes and looked intently. At that moment, his pupils suddenly turned blue. He saw something above the bloody footprint. It was the same large, pale foot that he had seen before. Not only that, he also saw a complete black shadow. After the shadow grabbed the head of the person in black, a familiar mutation began. Zhang Explode was shocked and turned pale. He asked in a trembling voice, "What on earth is that black shadow?" Xiao Yi was unusually serious at the moment. He told Zhang Explode that these footprints, or rather the black shadow, came out of his mouth. Zhang Explode's pupil shrank at the words, feeling shocked inexplicably. So, the monsters hidden in the blood he had previously vomited were these things? So, those monsters were the ones surrounding him and yelling to open the door at that time? Thinking of this, Zhang Explode covered his mouth, unable to believe these, nor did he understand why this would happen. Xiao Yi, on the other hand, calmly explained that these monsters were originally in the human body, even saying that they were originally humans, just that they were deceased. Is a deceased person not a ghost? Zhang Explode found it hard to believe. Do such things really exist in this world? Xiao Yi suddenly smirked and made a gesture of silence. He said, "Never say the word ghost, otherwise they will hear it." And their name is called Shang, which means a man who died too young. Shang? He suddenly realized that there was also a group of Shang. Looking at the suddenly appearing group of terrifying faces, he was so scared that his soul seemed to leave his body. But before he could react, he was grabbed by Xiao Yi, and they both jumped off the rooftop. Although Zhang Explode was almost dragged and thrown to the ground, he did not suffer any serious injuries. Xiao Yi, on the other hand, remained calm and explained to him patiently. He said that at the moment of death, a person's consciousness will briefly leave the body. During this period, no one knows where this consciousness goes, but soon it will return. However, when they come back, they need to pass through a door. And that door is you. Ah? Am I the door? In other words, since they are called Shang, then you are Shangman. At this moment, the group of people in black downstairs has all turned into mutants. Upon hearing the movement, they all swarmed towards Zhang Explode. Just at the moment when Zhang Explode felt despair, Gong Ling suddenly appeared in front of him, holding a long knife and coldly said, "I'll clear the way." Meanwhile, Xiao Yi, this guy, was still blandly explaining. He said, "Since there are both Shang and Shangman in the world, then there are naturally experts specializing in dealing with these guys. So you can call us Chu Wu?" Chu Wu. Until today, Zhang Explode only discovered that his reincarnated self is no longer a normal human being, and is now a kind of monster called Shangman. As for the four-person group who used to bury themselves at every turn, they are a special organization specifically targeting Shang and Shangman. Named Chu Wu. Episode 6 Encounter at this moment. The boy who was said to have been sealed for over 300 years has already been captured by Xiao Yi. If nothing unexpected happens, the mission of this trip will be considered completed. The lackeys on the mob boss's side are obviously not very effective. They were almost completely wiped out after being attacked by Shang. The eldest brother, who barely escaped, didn't even care that he'd lost his sunglasses. He ran wildly all the way back to the entrance of the park. He wanted to report the situation inside to the boss, and then make a decision. However, the boss remained silent and directly shoved the folding fan into his mouth. He doesn't care about the life or death of these henchmen. He only cares about whether the task is completed. Because he said, "If you can't find them, don't bother coming back." The leader left with his lunchbox in hand. At this time, Xiao Yi and the other two had already finished the cleanup at the park. As for this child, they believed that wherever he came from, he should return there. Xiao Yi firmly gripped the child's neck without any mercy. And the little boy never said a word from beginning to end. It is unclear whether he couldn't speak or chose not to. But at this moment, the little boy once again regained some distant memories. That should have been 300 years ago, when he was in front of his mother, and someone pierced his temple with a golden needle. And the mother was already crying tears, her eyes filled with heartache and helplessness. After seeing these memories, he suddenly welled up with hot tears, and couldn't help but burst into angry shouts. At the same time, a force of alienation surged forth, and in an instant, even the boy's face became terrifying. Xiao Yi acted swiftly, and pulled out the golden needle, stabbing it directly into his original wound. This needle seemed to hit the nail on the head, directly suppressing the boy's transformation. His pupils shrank at first, and then quickly dilated. And his arms also weakly dropped down. Xiao Yi is not a cold-hearted person. He saw the tears welling up in the corner of the boy's eyes, and naturally guessed that he had experienced too much misfortune in the past. But Xiao Yi could only silently say sorry for this. He smiled and turned his head, ready to call Gong Ling and Zhang Explode to go back together. But when he turned his head, he found that Zhang Explode, that kid, was actually missing. Gong Ling was also surprised to hear this. She did not expect that Zhang Explode would dare to sneak away when she was not paying attention. However, before they could prepare to pursue, a black shadow suddenly appeared in front of them. It turned out that the gang leader had arrived. He stepped on the head of one of his henchmen and said, "Xiao Yi, they have gone too far to hurt his brother in this way." Facing such groundless accusations, Xiao Yi and Gong Ling couldn't be bothered to explain even a word. They just exchanged a look, letting him figure it out for himself. Unexpectedly, the gang leader suddenly pointed at the boy in Xiao Yi's arms, and said that he was his private property. This means that not only did the two of them kill many of his brothers, but they also openly snatched his private property, which is really outrageous. So their actions were sentenced to death, which shouldn't be too much. Speaking of this, he smirked with a mouthful of black teeth. After a moment of silence, Xiao Yi suddenly exclaimed, "Oh!" It seems that he finally understood the purpose of the newcomer from the previous chattering. He smiled and said, "You are their leader, right? It's good timing that you're here. I happen to have a question for you." After saying that, he casually discussed with Gong Ling, asking her if she wanted to go chase after that guy, Zhang Explode. When he said that, the gang leader was not pleased. He directly stood in front of the two with a stern look and said, "Neither of you can leave." In this way, it did give Zhang Explode enough opportunity to escape. He ran out while gasping for breath. He kept looking back anxiously, afraid that Xiao Yi and the others might be chasing him. But strangely, up to now, it has been quiet behind him. By the looks of it, he can also consider himself successfully escaped. However, thinking about those so-called Zhang Explodes that were seen before is a bit unnerving. But at this moment, a rustling sound suddenly came. Zhang Explode was suddenly startled, and in the corner of his eye, he noticed a pair of pale big feet standing not far away. However, when he turned to take a closer look, there was nothing there. Could this be just an illusion? Strangely enough, the rustling sound continued to persist in his ears. In terror, Zhang Explode had no choice but to flee as fast as he could. He was unwilling to accept the fact that he was the Shang man. He only knew that he was a living person, and he has many things to accomplish. Not long after, he passed by the carousel again. Unlike before, this time he really recalled some distant memories. It seems that his past self was still like a child back then, and the amusement park was still incredibly lively. In those memories, he also saw his father and mother in those memories. Until this moment, he finally knew where that familiar feeling came from. It turns out, he had been here before. However, on the side of the gang leader, he clearly underestimated Xiao Yi's strength. He hadn't even seen clearly what had happened, and he was already curled up on the ground. He just didn't know if he had understood some principles of being a human being at this moment. He was truly short-sighted. He is a gang leader, just by appearance. Everyone should remember a certain former acquaintance. Of course, this Yuanhua is not the same as that Yuanhua. This mafia boss is not only cruel and bloodthirsty, but when he gets ruthless, he even spares not his own people. Unfortunately, today he encountered a tough opponent. Because after just a few rounds, he hunched over and knelt on the ground. He didn't expect the agility of this young man's movements. He hardly touched him from start to finish. Chapter 7: Interrogation. It turned out that when he intercepted Xiao Yi and Gong Ling earlier, he found himself being ignored by the two of them, especially Gong Ling, who completely ignored him and left directly, preparing to capture the escaping Zhang Explode. As for Xiao Yi, this guy is even more annoying. He simply doesn't make a move and just keeps dodging. This directly nullifies all the attacks from the gang boss. During this time, he even smiled and advised the gang boss to talk things out properly. Unexpectedly, the gang boss simply couldn't listen and became even more furious. Xiao Yi could only sigh helplessly. Then he made a gesture. And the momentum of the gang leader is strong at this moment when he sees Xiao Yi changing his moves. His eyes widened in fear. He realized he couldn't dodge in time, so he ended up crashing solidly into the iron gate. He was hit so hard that he was in a sorry state, completely disheveled. Xiao Yi, that guy, actually said in a sigh, "Oh, why is there a door here?" The infuriated gang leader, who suffered a big loss, gritted his teeth and wiped away his nosebleed, asking, "So tell me, which path are you really on?" Xiao Yi still maintained his composure and smiled back. "The righteous path in the world," because he had already realized that this gang leader was not a peer at all, just a typical gang boss. Seeing the arrogant look on this kid's face, the gang leader quietly drew out his folding fan. At this moment, he didn't care where this guy came from. All he knew was that this kid had to be taken care of today. But Xiao Yi was obviously distracted at the moment. He glanced at the boy standing in the distance and knew that he could not delay any longer. He had already sensed that at this moment, Gong Ling should have already caught Zhang Explode, so he should also quickly end this farce. But in reality, Gong Ling is itching with anger over here. Because when she found Zhang Explode, she saw him gazing at the carousel in a daze, which made her mistakenly think that Zhang Explode was not trying to escape, but was reminiscing about the past. Unexpectedly, she just shouted Zhang Explode from a distance. That guy turned around and ran, almost making her angry. Of course, Gong Ling is like this over here. After all, she only needs to catch up with Zhang Explode. But there are many things to consider on Xiao Yi's side. Because the boss spoke harshly to Xiao Yi for a long time, but Xiao Yi, who was distracted, ignored everything he said. This embarrassed the boss, so he waved his fan and struck directly at Xiao Yi's face. At a critical moment, the awakened Xiao Yi instinctively leaned to the side and narrowly avoided the fatal blow. And the fan of the black boss pierced straight into the wall. He listened to the sound of clanging metal and looked at the wall that had a large hole pierced through it. Xiao Yi broke out in a cold sweat. But Black Boss's attack clearly hadn't ended, so he could only dodge by leaping. Finally, Xiao Yi found an opportunity in the intensive attacks. He struck again, grabbing the wrist of the Black Boss in one move. He stared at the folding fan in confusion and asked, "Could this fan be made of iron?" Unexpectedly, Black Boss did not respond, but instead gave a sinister smile. Because the next moment, he opened the folding fan and revealed 3 hidden throwing knives between the ribs of the fan. Xiao Yi was horrified and quickly tilted his head back to evade. 2 flying blades grazed his chin directly and landed on the wall behind him. As for the 3rd flying blade, it was naturally bitten by Xiao Yi and held in his mouth. He smiled and exclaimed, "What an exquisite little knife!" His disdainful attitude made Black Boss furious with shame. He fiercely waved his folding fan again, striking directly. However, he forgot. Fighting is not all about fierce attacks. Xiao Yi looked at He Laoda taking big steps, suddenly grinned strangely, then lifted his foot and kicked directly. He hit the target with one strike, so the scene from before appeared. He Laoda knelt on the ground in pain, sobbing incoherently. Xiao Yi did not take the opportunity to make a move, but still faithfully asked him where the child came from. Unexpectedly, He Laoda endured the pain and made a move. With one move, he forced Xiao Yi to retreat. He criticized Xiao Yi for acting excessively. Then he ripped off his own clothes and gritted his teeth, saying, "If I don't kill you today, I probably won't have a good night's sleep for the rest of my life." Thinking about it, it's true. After all, if Xiao Yi were still alive, it would be like there was still someone in the world making him extremely agonized. Seeing Black Boss in this state, Xiao Yi sighed helplessly. It seems that he will have to hide for a while. Watching the dense flying blades coming towards him, Xiao Yi dodged and weaved. He jumped in front of the Black Boss and leaped directly behind him. The Black Boss was suddenly shocked and quickly turned around to respond. But as soon as he turned around, he saw Xiao Yi's big hand had already reached in front of him. In that moment, he seemed to see countless terrifying things pouncing towards him, a sight of horror unlike anything he had ever seen in his life. However, the anticipated attack did not come. When Black Boss opened his eyes, he found Xiao Yi's hand frozen in front of his eyes, and his glasses suddenly cracked. In shock, Black Boss hastily jumped out. He stared nervously at Xiao Yi's hand, as if looking at something extremely terrifying. "Hand? What hand? I haven't made a move yet." Xiao Yi smiled and twisted his wrist before kindly asking him where the child had come from. At this moment, Black Boss was already in a panic. He couldn't believe what he had just seen. So, he looked dejected and scratched his head, saying, "Okay, I'll tell you. The kid, along with that coffin, were both gifts from others." Upon hearing this, Xiao Yi frowned and asked who had sent them. Unexpectedly, the boss in black showed his black teeth again and said, "Of course, it was sent by Yama, the king of hell." He then did so under Xiao Yi's shocked expression. The boss directly put his thumb into his mouth, and then drew a strange pattern on his face. Then Xiao Yi saw the boss screaming strangely and jumping up like a deity. He said that all of this was forced by you brat, because he never easily uses this life-threatening move. As he spoke, he began singing and dancing, seeming to be preparing to invite God to possess him. When the chanting ended, he rolled his eyes and angrily pointed at Xiao Yi, shouting a phrase. "Yama's death claim." What a mess! The sudden slap brought Black Boss back to reality directly. He was dumbfounded. Why didn't this move work? While Xiao Yi looked impatient, telling the Black Boss to stop playing tricks and instead honestly answer the origins of that little kid. But the Black Boss obviously remained stubborn, chanting once again, which left Xiao Yi speechless. He looked at the child who had been left aside for a long time, feeling increasingly restless in his heart. This time, he put away his original playful attitude. Instead, with a serious expression, he patted the leader's shoulder and said, "This is the last time I am asking." Instantly, the leader became obedient. The two squatted in the corner, asking and answering. Shortly, he figured out the child's background clearly. Xiao Yi did not intend to kill the guy, but instead asked him to call an ambulance for his brothers. Maybe some lives could be saved. Before leaving, he also admonished the Black Boss not to dabble in such shady business in the future. And he also wants to stay away from such kids in the future, because they have been watching closely. Of course, he also has one final piece of advice, which is to suggest the boss to brush his teeth more often when he has time. However, Xiao Yi had not taken a few steps when Gong Ling's phone suddenly rang. He even thought that Gong Ling had already caught Zhang Explode and had a smile on his face, praying that Zhang Explode would not be beaten too badly. But Gong Ling's words made his expression suddenly change. Because Zhang Explode really escaped? What? And there's someone you can't catch? To get rid of this guy, who always wants to bury him at the slightest provocation, Zhang Explode finally found the right opportunity. He successfully escaped the pursuit in an abandoned park. In reality, although he seemed to have escaped, he never managed to escape Chu Wu's surveillance. Gong Ling has already found out where he lives. Looking at the boy Xiaoyi lying quietly in the back seat, he suddenly felt like laughing. Because this boy and Zhang Explode are both Chongman. Now catching one makes it seem very unprofessional like them. Even more outrageous is that Zhang Explode managed to escape from the hands of the big sister, truly unexpected for him. Gong Ling didn't know how to describe the situation at that time. She only knew that Zhang Explode was very slippery. If you have to make her describe it, then it would be that this kid is as slippery as a cockroach. Upon hearing this rare metaphor, Xiaoyi was momentarily stunned. He began to consider whether or not to lend a hand. Unexpectedly, Gong Ling seemed to have sensed his thoughts and directly said, "Don't intervene, I want to catch him myself." Episode 8, Tracking. At this moment, Zhang Explode clearly has no idea that danger is looming closer and closer. He is still busy packing things up, seemingly planning to grab a bag and run. Although the room has been turned upside down by him, the items in the drawer are neatly organized. There is an envelope, a hearing aid, and some other things. When he sees these, a soft look suddenly flickers in his eyes. Although the endings of these stories have caused him unbearable pain, at least they contain his most precious memories. In contemplation, Zhang Explode suddenly felt a surge of restlessness rising up in his chest. He was horrified and quickly covered his mouth because he knew how terrifying the things he would spit out could be. Just then, the noise at the door startled him. "Hello," Xiaoyi greeted somewhat proudly as he opened the door. But all that greeted him was an empty room. Of course, it's still in a messy state as it was ransacked. "It seems we arrived a step too late." Xiaoyi carefully surveyed the room's environment. When he saw a calendar covered in writing, he couldn't help but freeze. He felt a slight pain in his heart because Zhang Explode had never told him that he had to work so much on his own. Today is the 27th. The day marked on the calendar is "Send money." It seems that these are the reasons why Zhang Explode had a lot of things to do in the beginning. Gong Ling was also somewhat touched and quietly added some information. Before arriving at this neighborhood, she had already conducted a detailed investigation. This place is the area with the lowest rent in the city, so it is also home to a large number of migrant workers. Upon hearing this, Xiaoyi couldn't help but sigh and say, "Life is not easy." Little did they know that as they were inspecting the room, Zhang Explode was already standing outside the window. He had no idea how Xiaoyi and the others had tracked him here. He had no time to consider this because his situation was very dangerous. After all, the height of 4 floors is enough to make any ordinary person tremble, let alone when only supported by a single water pipe. But at this moment, a crow suddenly flew past Zhang Explode. The crow was still sitting brazenly on the nearby power line, staring straight at him. The next moment, Gong Ling reached out and grabbed Zhang Explode's hand, causing him to be instantly shocked and pale. How did this woman know that we are hiding here? Could it be the doing of that crow? In the struggle, Zhang Explode's body staggered. He fell straight down the stairs. Fortunately, several cardboard boxes downstairs acted as a cushion, preventing Zhang Explode from falling too tragically. Even so, he still felt a sweetness in his mouth. However, as soon as he opened his eyes, he saw a dark shadow descending from the sky. Because that woman actually jumped down and appeared unscathed. Zhang Explode was so shocked that he didn't care about his injuries and got up and ran directly. Gong Ling didn't actually chase after him. It seems that this sister may have some cleanliness preferences, as she doesn't want to step on those dark dirty marks. But just a moment later, she suddenly chased after him by leveraging the wall. This scene naturally fell into Xiaoyi's eyes. He no longer had his previous carefree and unrestrained demeanor, but instead appeared to be in a complicated mood. He remembered what Gong Ling had told him before, that she was checking Zhang Explode's address. Gong Ling discovered similarities between Zhang Explode and them. At that time, Xiao Yi was very surprised and thought that Zhang Explode had some background. But Gong Ling's words left him stunned because Zhang Explode, like them, was also an orphan. So at this moment, Xiao Yi gazed at the messy small room and suddenly felt a mix of emotions. It was at this moment that he came to a new decision. Meanwhile, Zhang Explode was still running wildly in the alley. He didn't know what was going on. He just couldn't shake off that woman. Until he saw the crow hovering above his head. He finally understood. However, as soon as he turned around, he found Xiao Yi blocking the way ahead. But Xiao Yi showed no intention of blocking his way, only calmly shouted in a low voice, "Zhang Explode, come back with us!" But Zhang Explode can't afford to care about that much at the moment. He turned his head to look at Gong Ling, who was about to catch up. He made a bold decision suddenly. And then, he found Xiao Yi in a stunned expression. He ran straight towards a narrow crack in the wall. He went in without even looking back, even if he got squeezed and injured all over. But Gong Ling had caught up. She grabbed Zhang Explode's backpack and was about to drag him out. But this actually aroused Zhang Explode's will to survive. He gritted his teeth and directly broke free from the backpack, then ran towards the exit on the other side. Gong Ling stood despondently in place without saying a word, looking at the empty gap in the wall in front of her. Until this moment, Xiao Yi finally understood why Big Sister likened Zhang Explode to a cockroach. Xiao Yi remained silent as well, because he did not understand. What exactly do the two words, "send money," on the calendar refer to? It actually made Zhang Explode disregard his injuries and run for his life at all costs. After that, he took the backpack handed to him by Gong Ling. He saw a yellowed photograph inside. Upon further reflection on the news report mentioned by Gong Ling, he finally understood what the amusement park meant to Zhang Explode yesterday. And what he didn't expect even more was that Zhang Explode had actually experienced similarly tragic incidents no less than 3 times. Because as a Chong man, Zhang Explode has lost a lot since birth. Because the misfortune shrouding him will destroy any ordinary person who tries to approach him. At this moment, Zhang Explode is still running around in a panic. He even accidentally knocked down a little girl. This scene seems familiar to him. It made him unable to help but recall that sad past. But he didn't dare to stop, nor did he have time to apologize. He had no choice but to run forward desperately again, until he fell at a remote alley. However, the fallen envelope made his heart ache suddenly, because it was another painful memory. This time he couldn't bear it anymore. He coughed out the accumulated fresh blood that had been building up for a few days. When he finally reacted, it was already too late. He panicked and used his hands to block, hoping that those monsters would not escape from here again. At this moment, Xiao Yi and others chased over, repeating the same old phrase as before. "Zhang Explode, come back with us. Being outside will only cause harm to more people." Cause harm to more people? Because Zhang Explode is not an ordinary human being, he has been filled with various misfortunes since he was born. He grew up in an orphanage and didn't meet his parents until he was 5 years old. Of course, technically they were just his foster parents. They were a young couple who affectionately called him EXP. At that moment, he became a city dweller. He now has loving parents who care for him, and finally has a happy family. Episode 9, The Past. When winter leaves and spring arrives, Zhang Explode feels more and more deeply the love from his parents. They treat him as if he were their own. Zhang Explode. He had long since embraced this lovely home. Nevertheless, even so, Zhang Explode has never smiled. He is not incapable of experiencing joy. He seems to be like an insulator to smiles. Regarding this, his parents don't mind at all. They still patiently guide him with smiles on their faces. They hold up a photo and tell Zhang Explode that he looks good when he smiles. One day, they came to an amusement park and watched other children chatting and laughing non-stop. They had an idea, which was to accompany Zhang Explode to ride on the carousel. But unfortunately, the place was packed and there was only one vacant seat left. Zhang Explode's parents had no choice but to buy a single ticket. They planned to let Zhang Explode go up and play for a while first. And they were prepared to go buy some food for EXP to bring back. So on the carousel, Zhang Explode recalled various past experiences and suddenly smiled foolishly. That was his genuine smile from the heart, also the first time he had ever smiled in his life. He eagerly awaited the return of his parents with joy. He wanted to tell them that he had learned how to smile. However, as he waited anxiously, all he saw in the vast crowd were strangers. Suddenly, there was a burst of exclamation from the crowd. Upon closer listening, it was only then that I realized the collapse of a wall structure in an amusement park, which unfortunately fell on a couple below. At that moment, Zhang Explode suddenly felt that everything in front of him lost its color, and he once again became an orphan. Later, Zhang Explode went to school. Just as usual, he sat alone in silence. But on that day, a classmate behind him suddenly tapped his shoulder, hoping he could help with a few math problems. Seeing the puzzled look on Zhang Explode's face, the classmate pointed to his own ear. Zhang Explode then realized that this classmate actually has a hearing impairment. Since then, the two of them gradually became more familiar with each other. They became good friends who could talk about anything. Furthermore, he even invited Zhang Explode to his house for a meal. He also played with Zhang Explode and other children. Since then, a long-lost smile gradually appeared on Zhang Explode's face. However, the good times did not last long. It seemed like his smile had defied the heavens. They had agreed to go swimming at the reservoir. Due to his fear of water, Zhang Explode was alone building sandcastles on the shore. But somehow, his good friend suddenly started to struggle in the water. Zhang Explode, seeing this, didn't care much and immediately jumped into the water to swim towards him. However, the waves pushing away from the shore layer by layer directly increased the distance between them. So at that moment, he lost his best friend. After that, no one was willing to get close to him anymore. Some people even spoke harsh words to him, carving all kinds of offensive nicknames on his desk. Under everyone's exclusion, his shadow never appeared in the classroom again. Later, as he grew up, at just 17 years old, he entered society and became an ordinary construction worker. On regular days, his only companions were a few steamed buns and the setting sun's twilight glow. But one day, a new young man came looking for him. His name is Little Wu. Because he saw Zhang Explode always being alone, he decided to keep him company so they can look out for each other at the construction site. So from that day on, they would casually toss a couple of bottles of water to each other. Helping each other with chores became a normal part of their daily lives. Although Zhang Explode never smiled from start to finish, Little Wu never asked about it either. Until one day, Little Wu, who often laughed foolishly, was criticized by Zhang Explode. He then said helplessly, "Since life has been so miserable, I have to laugh more, otherwise how can I justify myself?" Here, he jokingly advised Zhang Explode not to show off anymore. He said that it's not a bad thing to joke around. Maybe he will get rich with just one smile. However, as the conversation progressed, Little Wu suddenly mentioned the topic of going to school. He said that his family values education a lot, so he works especially hard in his studies. However, he has a younger sister who performs even better academically. Therefore, as her older brother, he resolutely dropped out of school to work, hoping to support his sister until she graduates from university. At this point, he tenderly tucked a rather thin envelope into his chest pocket. It contained the wages he had saved, which he would send back home every month. And Zhang Explode naturally knew about the income from this tough job, so he also wondered if this money would be enough. Of course, it's not enough. Little Wu's purpose in saying so much today is to discuss with Zhang Explode and see if he can borrow some money. Actually, Zhang Explode was already somewhat intrigued at that time, but he still teased Little Wu insincerely. However, that night, it suddenly started to rain, and as usual, Zhang Explode excitedly grabbed 2 boxes of food and ran to the construction site. But as soon as he stepped out, all the warning lights in the entire factory lit up. Seeing his colleagues all rushing in panic towards a certain direction, shouting for everyone to go and rescue someone, Zhang Explode hurried over. But when he arrived there, he saw a tower crane hook that had smashed the floor, along with a badly damaged safety helmet. In that moment, he lost his best colleague. Looking at the thin envelope soaked by the rain, Zhang Explode suddenly felt suffocated. He didn't understand what he had done wrong to deserve such treatment from fate. He had no malicious intent and just wanted to live a simple life. So, from that moment on, he tried hard to isolate himself, hoping that fate would forget about him. And he also chose the 27th of each month as his remittance day. But what happened these few days suddenly broke this tranquility. He looked at the puddle of blood beneath him with a sense of despair. But at this moment, a familiar voice suddenly sounded beside him. It was Xiao Yi. They have arrived. Just like before, Xiao Yi gently said, "Zhang Explode, come back with us." But unlike before, this time Xiao Yi reached out a hand to try to help him. In addition, he added, "Perhaps we can help you stay away from those tragedies." A family should be neat and tidy. Several people went out. Only a few people came back. Ah, no, bring back one more person. However, Zhang Explode to some extent came back voluntarily this time. Just as Zhang Explode arrived at the entrance of the Taoist temple, he noticed the middle-aged man standing there quietly. The man's eyes carried a sense of dominance and a compelling scrutinizing gaze that was both irresistible and intimidating. But strangely, the man suddenly fell silent and made a gesture of "please" towards the few people. This left Zhang Explode, who was walking in front, somewhat at a loss. He wanted to seek help from Xiao Yi. But it seems like this guy didn't see it at all. He simply said, "I'm going to make breakfast." He just went around it. But fortunately, this guy still has a little conscience because before leaving, he told Zhang Explode to go to the third brother's place for a visit. Episode 10, Shang. But as soon as Zhang Explode entered the door, he regretted it. It turns out that the third brother Xiao Yi mentioned is actually that weird uncle with the backbreaker 3000. At this moment, that guy is sitting face to face with Zhang Explode. The close proximity has already made him feel uneasy all over. Suddenly, that strange uncle blurted out a sentence out of nowhere. "What is your name?" Zhang Explode doesn't dare to neglect. He nervously said his name. Unexpectedly, the guy stared straight at him and said, "I know." Zhang Explode was stunned. Although he didn't know how to respond, he was already cursing in his heart, thinking, "If you already know, why ask?" Luckily, Xiao Yi's arrival helped defuse the situation. It turned out that he had already prepared the food and came to invite everyone to get ready to eat. The uncle still kept his eyes fixed on Zhang Explode. Then he made an "okay" hand gesture. Of course, he made the gesture using the backbreaker 3000 move. I really don't know how he could control this thing so skillfully. Breakfast is very rich, with a basket of steamed buns and over a dozen eggs, plus a few side dishes. Although it's very simple. But it seems that everyone is accustomed to it. It seems to be because we are in a Taoist temple. Or perhaps it's because of financial constraints. As for that strange uncle, that's right. He still uses the backbreaker 3000 remarkably well. Xiao Yi saw Zhang Explode staring blankly and gently told him to eat quickly and make himself at home. Zhang Explode hesitantly agreed, although he initially refused. However, Xiao Yi had already explained to him earlier. He said that one can earn money in the Taoist temple, and also prevent some unexpected incidents from happening. Zhang Explode naturally knows that this is talking about his involvement with Shangmen. He suddenly wanted to understand how everyone would help him, and what he needed to do to cooperate. As soon as he said that, the backbreaker 3000 pointed over. The weird uncle with a mischievous look said, "Getting help from them will cost money," leaving Zhang Explode momentarily stunned and at a loss. Xiao Yi observed the situation. Just saw that strange uncle say, "Asking for their help means paying money." Zhang Explode was stunned, and for a moment didn't know what to do. Xiao Yi, seeing the situation, quickly picked up a steamed bun and stuffed it into the third brother's mouth. Then he let Zhang Explode eat in peace, saying they would explain other matters after dinner. Gong Ling remained silent the whole time and left immediately after finishing breakfast, saying she wanted to go back to rest. Zhang Explode, feeling uneasy, started eating with hesitation. However, after just a few mouthfuls, the strange uncle then startled him once again, saying, "Zhang Explode just ate a total of 1 steamed bun, 3 eggs and a bowl of porridge. He has already written it down." As he spoke, he also patted his belly. Before Zhang Explode could react, he stood up directly and said he wanted to go out for a walk. Xiao Yi naturally saw through the third brother's thoughts. He immediately called out to wash the bowl himself. Unexpectedly, that guy, upon hearing this, instead ran faster than a rabbit. However, when he turned around, the usually aloof uncle also put down his chopsticks and said, "I'll leave it to you, Xiao Yi." Upon hearing this, Xiao Yi respectfully agreed. But Zhang Explode did not expect that the aloof uncle would give him a meaningful look before leaving. Then he patted Zhang Explode on the shoulder, telling him to take his time and not rush. This feeling suddenly stirred an indescribable emotion in Zhang Explode's heart. As a result, only Xiao Yi and Zhang Explode were left at the table. Xiao Yi, still maintaining his friendly tone, gestured to Zhang Explode to eat more if he hadn't eaten enough, then quietly put on his headphones. Unexpectedly, as soon as the steamed bun entered his mouth, a strange sensation surged from his stomach. He thought about what he had vomited and thought about those monsters named Shang. Zhang Explode, who had just calmed down with great difficulty, asked with a solemn expression, "Are those things called Shang really what I threw up?" Xiao Yi smiled at his words and replied with just 2 words, "Yes, indeed." After confirming the matter, Zhang Explode seemed to have accepted this fact. At this moment, he wondered whether these monsters called Shang were hidden in his body or in his blood. But unexpectedly, Xiao Yi denied everything. He said those Shang creatures were right behind Zhang Explode. When he heard this, Zhang Explode was shocked. He quickly got up and looked behind him. But there was nothing there. Xiao Yi laughed out loud at the scene. He explained that when he said, "behind you," he didn't mean the physical back, but rather the opposite in reality. In other words, if what Zhang Explode sees in front of him is reality, then his back is connected to another world. And those Shang that Zhang Explode sees are running out from that world. Therefore, Zhang Explode's body is a gateway between 2 worlds. After hearing these words, Zhang Explode finally understood what a Shangman was. Then he panicked. He didn't understand why fate had to be so cruel to him, why he was chosen to bear all this. But Xiao Yi still had that smiling expression. He told Zhang Explode that it was his natural disposition. When these words came out, Zhang Explode was stunned. He seemed somewhat incredulous. And Xiao Yi continued to explain calmly. He said that Shangman's birth was random, without any cause or effect. In other words, Zhang Explode was the chosen one, but even though they were specializing in dealing with Shang and Shangman, they did not fully understand the birth principle of Shangman. They only knew that when a person became Shangman, they would inevitably go through a process called Shang ascension. And this process necessarily involves death. In other words, Zhang Explode has already died once. It's just strange that the current Zhang Explode is in a very bizarre state. That is, he is both a Shangman and a human. Because Xiao Yi has never seen anyone recover from the Shangman state. In this view, Zhang Explode is once again a lucky guy, or you could say he is still a miracle. However, Xiao Yi clearly has not finished speaking. He continued to explain. In normal circumstances, once a person completes Shang Ascension, they will completely lose their humanity and become a walking corpse, constantly releasing monsters. The way to deal with this is to cut off the heads of these Shangmen and bury them, just like what is happening in this room. This room? Zhang Explode suddenly shuddered. He looked at the densely packed jars and couldn't help but feel a chill down his spine. But how could he have imagined that just as Xiao Yi was explaining the way to eliminate Shangmen? Next door, the same drama was unfolding. This was a room filled with medicine cabinets, and the floor was marked with formations. The aloof uncle stood in front of a table covered in white cloth, and on that table lay the Shangman boy that Xiao Yi brought back. As for Xiao Yi, he seemed to be cooperating with the uncle, explaining in detail every step after the extraction. That means after the extraction, the bronze needle lock, 7 orifices sealing, needs to be used. After that, it can be immersed in a sticky rice jar, and a talisman can be pasted to seal the jar. However, even after Xiao Yi finished speaking, Zhang Explode was still in shock. Because he couldn't believe that there were so many jars here. Doesn't this mean that there are many Shangmen like this in the world? Xiao Yi smiled and said, "Don't just focus on the quantity. In fact, all these were saved up by several generations of Chu Wu. Some of these jars have probably been stored for hundreds of years." But even though Xiao Yi explained it that way, Zhang Explode still felt lingering fear, because in that jar, he seemed to see his own future. So he asked Xiao Yi with some concern if he himself would eventually transform entirely into Shangman. Upon hearing this, Xiao Yi suddenly smirked, although he was not sure whether Zhang Explode would completely ascend. But as long as Zhang Explode will inexplicably vomit blood, that means he has the potential for that kind of change. But rather than worrying about the unknown, it's better for him to seize the opportunity to eat more sticky rice while it's hot to dispel his worries. The moment he heard this, Zhang Explode instantly transformed into a hardcore eater. At this moment, he is unwilling to waste even a single grain of sticky rice. He even asked questions while eating. "Eating glutinous rice, will I be able to eliminate Shang Ascension?" But unfortunately things didn't go as planned because Xiao Yi didn't know either. Zhang Explode is in a panic again. He really wants to know how he should go about to become a normal person completely. In fact, Xiao Yi and the others are even more eager to know about this. Or you could say any Chu Wu would want to know. Just then, Xiao Yi heard a voice on the other end of the phone call, and Zhang Explode, who is sensible, remained silent. The voice belonged to the aloof uncle. He asked Xiao Yi to inquire whether there are any special items in the room where the coffin was placed at that time. "Anything else?" Zhang Explode was surprised. Wasn't this asked before? He already mentioned there were many dead people. There is also a red coffin and a boy. Oh, and there are many blood footprints. But what the uncle cares about is not these, but letting him continue to recall. "Is there more?" Zhang Explode was a little puzzled as he carefully recalled the scene at that time. Gradually, he remembered that when he walked into that room, he saw many gold bricks. Upon hearing this, the uncle did not ask any more questions, because on the table in front of him were several broken pieces of gold bars. And these were exactly what he took out from the child's abdomen. So who exactly sewed these gold bars inside? Meanwhile, the gang boss, who was beaten up by Xiao Yi, finally escaped in a sorry state back to the warehouse. As soon as he entered, he loudly ordered his subordinates to bring him some water and medicine. However, after yelling for half a day, none of his subordinates came to help. This made him very angry. Where did those damn guys go? However, just at that moment, a faint voice suddenly came from the side. "I saw a strange figure with a painted face leaning on the sofa. sewing something in hand. Interestingly, on the strange figure's head was also a golden needle, and even his body was covered in marks of needle and thread. I heard him questioning Black about the delayed delivery, and why there was only an empty coffin left in the goods shipped back. To my surprise, the Black boss was not afraid at all. He replied disdainfully, "What? I can't stop selling if I want to." Upon hearing this, the weird man with the flower face seemed visibly displeased. He mentioned that he had already paid a deposit, emphasizing the importance of honesty in doing business. But the boss clearly did not regard him highly. Honesty had no value in his eyes. He shouted directly inside, asking his men to come out and chop off the impolite idiot on the spot. However, the entire warehouse remained quiet, and the jester even sneered at him, mocking him to speak louder, lest his own brothers couldn't hear him. Gold, this relatively rare and precious metal, has now been sewn into the navel of a boy. The navel, which is considered the basis of the 12 meridians, and the source of the 5 viscera and 6 bowels for humans. What could be the meaning of sewing gold in this location? As a contemporary Chu Wu big brother, the aloof uncle is somewhat perplexed. He doesn't understand what these predecessors from 300 years ago were trying to achieve. And this anomaly naturally brought Xiaoyi over. He was holding a piece of gold and looking at it carefully. Although he seemed to have sensed something, he remained silent. Episode 11. Start working. However, Xiaoyi ran to the next room. He naturally couldn't leave Zhang Explode alone. So, as before, he once again called the third brother. So, a familiar scene unfolded, and Zhang Explode felt so awkward that it seemed like his toes were trying to dig an escape tunnel. Fortunately, this strange atmosphere did not last long because Xiaoyi and the others had already come out from the inner room. However, at this moment, the aloof man was holding a jar in his hand, creating a somewhat tense atmosphere. Zhang Explode couldn't help but feel nervous. In the end, he couldn't help but ask, "What's in the jar?" But no one responded to him. Because although Zhang Explode asked the question, the answer seems to be already obvious. After understanding this, Zhang Explode also fell silent. He looked at the jar, as if he was looking at himself. Xiaoyi patted the stunned Zhang Explode, and said that the boy who might lead him to the amusement park could be this one. Because that place is where the boy was once buried, and before they met, the boy had been sealed in a coffin for over 300 years. So, Zhang Explode's appearance was like a long-awaited relief for him. Upon saying this, Xiaoyi suddenly shouted and told Zhang Explode to get ready to take him out for some fresh air. Zhang Explode subconsciously followed along because his heart was already in chaos, and he indeed needed to release some tension. But at this moment, an arm was draped over his shoulder. Looking at the muscular Uncle Zhang Explode, who owned the Backbreaker 3000, he woke up abruptly. Perhaps, at this moment, he no longer needed to relax. Sure enough, the expected strange atmosphere has arrived. I saw the Backbreaker 3000 placed next to Zhang Explode's ear, making a gesture as if whispering something secretly. Then, the creepy warm breath came close to the ear. And that strange uncle said something that really caught his attention. So when Zhang Explode just walked out the door, then the strange uncle cleared his throat to announce something. That is, from today onwards, this Li Explode is his apprentice. Zhang Explode was speechless. He had clearly told him his name at least twice. "Are you going to bow down and pay your respects to your master?" With a strange uncle's reminder, he immediately woke up. Zhang Explode didn't care anymore whether the name was right or not, and he immediately bowed respectfully to accept the apprenticeship. So from that moment on, he had an inexpensive master. And the first thing after bowing to his master was to have the master take the disciple to visit the main courtyard of the sect. As for Xiaoyi, who originally planned to take Zhang Explode out to relax, he was also completely baffled by this sudden turn of events. At this moment, Master brought Zhang Explode to an elegant courtyard and pointed at the surrounding houses, asking him what he thought, and which one he planned to buy. Zhang Explode was once again confused when he heard this. He wondered if Master had forgotten something. Thinking quickly, he explained that he was not here to buy a house. To his surprise, Master furrowed his brows and asked, "Then why are you here looking for me?" Could it be that this Master couldn't even remember something for 3 minutes? Feeling speechless, Zhang Explode quickly revealed the secret conversation they had before. The condition to restore himself to normal was to become the Master's disciple. Fortunately, the Master should not have forgotten about this matter. After a moment of contemplation, he suddenly said in a serious tone, "Zhang Explode's current physique is very attractive to Shang. So, those Shang who wander in the outside world will gradually gather around Zhang Explode, thereby influencing the people around him. And this is also the reason why Zhang Explode has become a disaster star. Therefore, his first step in wanting to become a normal person is to stop Shang from getting close." As soon as he heard this confident explanation, Zhang's eyes lit up. He asked his master with a look of surprise, "How exactly can all of this be done?" Then he saw his master pulling out a mask of ancient coins. Upon seeing this object, he immediately remembered that when he was tied up here before, it seemed like he had worn this thing. The master explained that this thing is called a 5-Emperor coin mask, which can ward off evil spirits. Wearing this item will not only deter evil things from approaching, but also help prevent Zhang from spitting blood. In addition, there is another crucial point, which is, it looks very handsome when worn. Upon hearing this, Zhang Explode already adores the master endlessly. This mask seems tailor-made for oneself no matter how you listen to it. Unexpectedly, the master suddenly held the mask in front of him and said, "Only for 19,888. When this was said, Zhang Explode's eyes instantly cleared up. The master was confused and once again held the mask in front of the disciple's eyes, but Zhang Explode remained indifferent. After holding back for a while, Zhang Explode somewhat obediently said, "I don't have money." So, his master promptly took back the treasure. And this scene also did not escape the eyes of Xiaoyi and the others. They all seemed somewhat accustomed to it. And the aloof uncle summoned a raven, had it smell the gold nugget in his hand, and then looked toward Xiaoyi. He wanted to confirm whether what the black boss said was trustworthy. Xiaoyi hesitated and made a sound of agreement, because intuitively he felt that the person would not deceive him. At that time, the black boss told him the origin of the coffin. He said that the coffin was purchased from a local person more than 10 years ago. When the coffin was just dug up, he thought it was an antique and bought it to resell at a high price in the future. However, he had no way of knowing that there was a little boy inside the coffin. So, when he opened the coffin for the first time, he lost many brothers. Xiaoyi was puzzled as soon as he heard it. Clearly, there was a lesson to be learned from past mistakes. Why did you still decide to open the coffin again? The leader suddenly lowered his head and took a while to answer. I just want to open it and see how well the child has been preserved. He's lying. Xiaoyi saw through it at a glance. But the leader of the Black Mafia threw out an even more shocking piece of news in order to divert attention. He said that there was actually more than just one coffin unearthed that day. If he remembers correctly, there should be at least 2 to 3 identical red coffins. Upon hearing this, Xiaoyi immediately became serious. He pursued with a question. What kind of people are the ones selling coffins to you? He suddenly asked this question, which startled Black Boss. He was so frightened that he said he couldn't remember anymore. His only impression now is that the person seemed to be a village chief, and that village seemed to be called Yellow-White Village. Upon hearing the name, Yellow-White Village, the aloof middle-aged man was also taken aback. Xiaoyi nodded. He said he had already asked Gong Ling to investigate this village. But unfortunately, there is almost no information about Yellow-White Village online. It seems like someone doesn't want the outside world to know about this village. Upon hearing this, the aloof uncle silently let the crow go, then turned to stare at the gold coins in his hand with a pensive look. The so-called yellow wit refers to ancient Taoist alchemy, the sacred art of refining elixirs and transmuting base materials into gold and silver. And now various signs have linked the two characters of yellow-white together, so there must be something wrong with this yellow-white village. Xiaoyi smiled when he heard this and said he would investigate. But the aloof middle-aged man stopped him because he wanted to find out more. Xiaoyi was wondering how to deal with Zhang Explode. Xiaoyi was taken aback when he heard this. Meanwhile, on Zhang Explode's side, he can be said to have used all his tricks, only to ask his master to temporarily lend him the face mask. Even if I have to work for food in the future, it's fine. Hearing this, the master, who was originally unhappy, seemed to be somewhat moved. Coincidentally, the telephone rang in the distance. So, under the master's command, Zhang Explode increased a bit and burst out. However, just as he picked up the phone, the voice inside suddenly startled him. Because what came through was a woman's cry for help, accompanied by some extremely eerie and bizarre sounds. Shortly after, Xiaoyi rushed over upon hearing the sound. He patted Zhang Explode on the shoulder, and then took the phone. Just a few words. Xiaoyi quickly confirmed the next place to go with just a few words. He stared at Zhang Explode and said, "There's work to be done." But if he goes on this mission by himself, what about Yellow-White Village? He thought of this. He looked at the third brother lying on the ground in the distance. He suddenly had an idea. So he blurted out the nickname. The third brother. The eighth. At that moment, a graceful figure suddenly flashed in front of him. It turned out to be Gong Ling who had arrived. She straightforwardly said, "I'll go." Upon hearing this, Xiaoyi was somewhat worried. After all, it seemed like Gong Ling had not rested for long. Would there be a problem if she pushed herself so hard? Gong Ling knew what he was worried about and simply said a sentence. This time she was just going to collect intelligence. All right then. Xiaoyi didn't persuade her anymore and just reminded her to stay in touch. Meanwhile, Zhang Explode was still staring blankly at the promotional poster stuck on the door, unable to believe if the content written on it was really something these guys could do. Xiaoyi once again pointedly shouted loudly, instructing Zhang Explode to get ready to set off. And his chief master stood up appropriately, just like last time, yawning and saying he needed to take a nap. But this time, Xiaoyi didn't indulge him and instead called out, "The eighth," again. However, after calling out, Xiaoyi suddenly looked towards Zhang Explode. He said somewhat regretfully, "What a pity, little Explode. I'm afraid you won't have the chance to witness the strongest Chu Wu of our Lisong temple." "The strongest Chu Wu? Just how powerful is it?" Zhang Explode asked curiously. But in the next moment, he suddenly found a big foot wearing clogs appear in front of him. It turns out that the most powerful Chu Wu in Xiaoyi's mouth refers to his master. Upon arriving at the destination, Master showed a look of admiration on his face and said that he still needed to personally step in. He only remembered to ask, "What is the mission for today?" after getting off the car. He had long been accustomed to this. Xiaoyi smiled at the words and looked at the old building in front of him. He said that this family had long been plagued by evil thing, especially the daughter in the family, who had suffered greatly from it. So, their purpose for this trip goes without saying. Upon hearing this, Zhang Explode's chief master suddenly understood. With a confident expression, he said to Lu Explode, "Today, let me show you my skills." Upon hearing this, Zhang Explode seemed to have resigned himself to it. He even considerately reminded the master to just call him Little Yellow in the future. However, they had just prepared to set off when Xiaoyi discovered. Suddenly, a figure with a strong immortal aura appeared behind him. The person was dressed in tattered clothes and turned out to be an old Taoist in his 50s or 60s. When the old Taoist walked up to them, he only said one sentence. "Are you all colleagues?" This is a story about evil spirits. It's an old residential community. A young mother is anxiously keeping watch by her daughter's bedside, using a piece of gold to wipe her arms. Just then, the brazier placed in the middle of the hall suddenly started to stir. Seeing the situation was not good, the anxious mother hurriedly got up to check, but she did not expect that she had only taken a few steps. Behind her, there came the sound of babbling. Turning around again, she found her daughter, who had been lying on the bed, suddenly floating up in an extremely eerie posture. Episode 12, Shang Harm. So she called Lisong Temple. Soon after, there was a knock on the door, and when she opened it, she found. The visitor was a bearded and scruffy old Taoist, exuding a subtle aura of authority without anger. The old Taoist immediately revealed his identity, saying that he was the celestial master Ma Dijin from Mount Zhongnan. This brief introduction was quite impressive. The hostess quickly invited him inside. Of course, she also noticed the three young people following Celestial Master Ma. The eighth took a big step forward, seeming to plan an introduction of himself. But the mother was clearly quicker. She asked if they were disciples of Celestial Master Ma. The eighth immediately became unhappy upon hearing that. He was about to explain, but Xiao Yi cheerfully stepped forward and said that they were just there to help. So, they were politely invited into the house. The room has good lighting, is well ventilated, and is spotlessly clean inside. This naturally brings joy and relaxation to those who see it. However, when they saw the girl in the inner room, their expressions suddenly became serious. The mother introduced several people, saying that this was her daughter, named Small Ka. She has been in poor health since she was young and has seen many doctors as a result. Even so, the daughter's health continues to deteriorate. So later, she tried to seek out a few masters. Those masters all said, after seeing her, that their daughters were being entangled by filthy things, and it was a very vicious kind. But even though they said so, not a single one of them could offer a solution. But she couldn't bear to see her daughter like this, with a high fever for days and still unconscious. There's no other way. She contacted some more experts today and wants to give it another try. At this moment, Celestial Master Ma spoke up. He said, judging from the girl's pulse, it seems that the evil object has probably penetrated deep into her internal organs. Hearing this, the mother panicked because at this moment, she was most afraid of hearing anything about it being in the advanced stages. Fortunately, Celestial Master Ma calmly reassured her, saying that he would take care of these things properly. Taking advantage of the opportunity, while the two were talking, Xiao Yi quietly touched the girl's temple. As a trace of blue light flashed by, the girl suddenly unconsciously shouted, "Mom!" Mom was startled and hurried to her daughter's bedside, asking with concern. Looking at the unfortunate mother and daughter, Xiao Yi sighed inwardly, then quietly told the third brother what she had learned. That is, this girl was indeed possessed. And that thing is still in this house. Although Zhang Explode did not hear these, he was still worried about the girl's situation. He did not understand why Shang had to disturb this girl. Upon seeing Zhang Explode transform back into the curious baby, Xiao Yi suddenly smiled and said, "People with heavy negative energy will naturally attract Shang. Besides, this girl has been weak and sickly for years, so she will naturally attract Shang. They will take advantage of her weakness and possess her." Upon hearing the term possession, Zhang Explode was somewhat surprised. He hadn't expected that this kind of thing, which he had only heard of in folklore, actually existed. Upon seeing this, Xiao Yi simply took the opportunity to explain it to him in more detail. He said that Shang is actually a kind of thought that occurs after one's death. In the beginning, they actually have no physical form. So these, Shang, rely on human bodies to achieve more concrete purposes after possessing them. For example, harming people's lives. Upon hearing this, Zhang Explode was shocked. He didn't understand why Shang would harm people if one dies. So be it. Why cause trouble for others? Xiao Yi shook his head. He said not everyone is inherently good, And many deceased individuals also have lingering attachments. And these resentments and grudges are the cause of their harm to others. So most of those who return to this world as spirits are filled with malice. However, spirits also require energy and need to feed just like humans. And humans happen to have the food they need, so they attach themselves to humans and will also consume the victim's vitality until the person's energy is depleted. But this does not mean the end, because they will seek out new targets. Upon learning this, Zhang Explode became worried once again. He wants to know how to help the girl escape from the clutches. But Xiaoyi smiled and said, "Wait until it's dark, because these Shangs fear sunlight. Once they are exposed to the sun, they will quickly perish. Therefore, during the day, these Shangs hide in the dark until night comes to search for food. However, although there are places in the room where the sunlight cannot reach, Xiaoyi also does not want to force it out prematurely, because he wants to know why this Shang keeps disturbing this little girl. But it's still some time before dark, we can't just do nothing, right?" Seeing Zhang Explode looking eager, Xiaoyi was startled. Then he remembered that Zhang Explode was already the third brother's apprentice. In other words, he was considered from the same sect. Thinking of this, he instructed Zhang Explode to find some things with heavy yin energy for him to see, because those objects could also attract Shang. So Zhang Explode enthusiastically started working. When Zhang Explode left, he immediately looked at the memorial photo hanging on the wall. At this moment, the movement in the inner room caught Xiaoyi's attention, as he saw the mother wiping her daughter's arms with a shiny gold object. Shocked, Xiaoyi quickly walked up and asked her what she was doing. The mother looked puzzled and said she was driving away evil spirits for her daughter. Xiaoyi was a little confused when he heard this. "Are you driving away evil spirits? What are you holding in your hand?" This made the mother unable to understand. Doesn't he see that this is a piece of gold? And Xiaoyi was stunned at the moment, because he felt like he had discovered a crucial clue. At that time, he and his eldest brother had analyzed the gold nuggets found in the boy's belly, even suspecting at one point that these gold pieces were the same ones used by their predecessors 300 years ago to suppress the evil spirits and demons. But this was ultimately just a speculation at that time, as they did not find any connection between the gold and the Shangman in any ancient texts. Are there still some little-known Shang suppression secrets in this world? At this point, Xiaoyi couldn't help but ask, "Madam, where did you hear that gold can be used to ward off evil?" Unexpectedly, the mother casually said, "In their area, there has always been a belief that rubbing the body with gold can ward off evil spirits." But as she spoke, she seemed to suddenly realize something, as this young man kept mentioning gold throughout his words, implying that he might have had an ulterior motive. So she quickly said that as long as they could cure her daughter, the gold would be a token of gratitude. Upon hearing this, Xiaoyi felt embarrassed and quickly waved his hands, explaining that this was not his intention. But just at that moment, the hall suddenly rang with old Taoists scolding. It turned out that Zhang Explode, who was busy working, accidentally tripped over the incline set by old Taoist, which naturally led to a rebuke from Celestial Master Ma. Zhang Explode was startled and stood there dumbfounded, not knowing what to do. As a result, the task of apologizing and resolving the situation fell on Xiaoyi. But the third brother was a bit unkind. Seeing his apprentice being bullied, he directly comforted and consoled him with compassion. What's even more infuriating is that those two guys were acting as if nothing had happened, walking away casually with their arms around each other's shoulders. One of them even walked on a few inclines and left. Xiaoyi didn't even have to turn his body before offering a sincere apology again. Seeing this situation, the frustrated Celestial Master Ma was helpless, and could only angrily scold a few words before hurrying off to attend to other matters. It's not even dark yet, but several crows have flown onto the trees outside. I wonder if they belong to the eldest brother. And Zhang Explode continues to patrol the room carefully. At this moment, he has arrived in the kitchen. But as soon as he opened the cabinet door, he felt a dark shadow suddenly dart out. In his horror, he quickly got up to take a look, but found nothing at all. However, he saw Celestial Master Ma vigorously shaking the bell while speaking emphatically. It sounded somewhat like an unfamiliar nursery rhyme. He even seemed to faintly hear words like 5 consecutive whips coming from inside. Here, the third brother, with a disdainful expression, quietly signaled to Xiao Yi, saying, "This old Taoist is not very capable." Xiao Yi smiled, showing that he didn't mind at all, because he could tell that this old Taoist was actually a nice person, and was indeed earnestly helping. But strangely, after the old Taoist uttered the words, "Vengeful spirits after death," his voice suddenly began to tremble. And at this moment, Zhang Explode obviously still had no clue, because somehow he suddenly had a relapse of his former professional illness. He unconsciously started fixing the faucet for others. When he came to his senses, the bell of old Taoist was already ringing chaotically. Suddenly he felt something was wrong behind him, but before he could even turn his head, a strange force struck him violently. Zhang Explode was caught off guard, and his forehead was instantly marked with a bloodstain. He was even knocked down to the ground along with his body. When he struggled to get up, strange cries rang in his ears. Only then did he see that Celestial Master Ma was standing in front of him, holding a bell, and telling him to get out of the way. However, just at that moment, a pair of large hands suddenly appeared and directly pressed down on old Taoist's head. In an instant, a blue light appeared, causing old Taoist to tremble as if he had been electrocuted. A horrifying dark shadow escaped from his body a moment later. At that moment, Zhang Explode seemed to have seen the appearance of that dark shadow. Old Taoist fell to the ground with a thud. Xiao Yi was still in a posture as if to help someone, looking apologetic, and said, "Oh, why didn't I catch it?" And Zhang Explode's chief master seemed a bit angry, whether it was because his disciple was hurt and he wanted to defend him, or he was angry at Shang being too bold. "The sky isn't even dark yet he dares to come out. Looks like this grudge is quite significant." Xiao Yi laughed in agreement. He inquired about Zhang Explode's injuries, and after learning that they were not serious, he asked another question. "Have you seen who just attacked you?" Zhang Explode nodded in a daze. Then, he couldn't help but look at the photo hanging on the wall. "Is it her?" Pay attention. This old Taoist claims to be Zhongnan Celestial Master Ma Dezhen. In order to help drive away evil spirits from a household, he set up inclined divination blocks in the room and performed a ritual dance. However, before old Taoist could even act, he was punished by an old grandmother who had passed away years ago. But what's strange is that instead of bothering old Taoist, the old grandmother took advantage of his body and suddenly appeared in front of Zhang Explode, who was concentrating on repairing the water pipes, and unexpectedly gave him a sudden blow. This won't do. Xiao Yi, who was sitting on the side, immediately refused to go along with it. He directly grabbed old Taoist's head, and with a series of crackling sounds, he forced the old lady out. Afterward, when Xiao Yi asked Zhang Explode if he saw the appearance of that shadow clearly, Zhang Explode couldn't help but look at the photo hanging on the wall. At this sight, everyone immediately understood. Of course, the noise just now naturally caught the attention of the mother. However, when she came out, the living room was already quiet and peaceful. Xiao Yi did not mention anything about what just happened. Instead, he asked the mother about the picture on the wall. The mother was somewhat surprised but still spoke about it. She said that was her mother-in-law, Small Ka's grandmother. As soon as Zhang Explode heard this, several people were stunned. No, this old lady must be crazy to actually harm her own granddaughter. Seeing everyone's strange expressions, the puzzled mother asked Xiao Yi why he brought this up. After all, the old person had passed away many years ago. Xiao Yi did not want to disclose the reason, so he changed the subject and started inquiring about the woman's husband. Upon hearing this, the mother suddenly fell silent. After a long while, she finally said with a face full of resentment, "That scoundrel owes a lot of debts and hasn't come back for many years." And his mother-in-law, who was driven away by him, even in her final moment, he didn't come back to take one last look. Upon hearing this, the mood of several individuals became somewhat heavy, but they didn't notice that there was a sudden change with the ancestral portrait hanging in the main hall. They saw that the originally black and white photo suddenly had a blue light shimmering in the eyes of the old grandmother, and even the glass of the frame began to crack slowly. Chapter 13, Ideation. But just at that moment, the suddenly awakened old Taoist startled them. At this moment, the old Taoist was touching his head with a dazed expression. After pondering for a moment, he suddenly looked serious and asked the others if he had just been possessed by something dirty. Upon hearing this, Zhang Explode and the other two subconsciously nodded, while old Taoist remained silent. Suddenly, he leaped up like a monkey, shouting angrily, "This is outrageous! How dare you disrespect me, Zhongnan Celestial Master! Today, old Taoist will make sure your soul scatters." He then tore open his clothes, smeared the blood from his bitten finger on his forehead, and drew a large blood talisman. Then a familiar scene appeared. Xiao Yi frowned as he felt like he had seen this thing somewhere before. Zhang Explode's chief master was even more straightforward, asserting directly that this old Taoist was not from the same profession. But what's strange is, as the old Taoist balanced himself with both hands and feet in a strange posture, suddenly a thunderous sound rang outside the house. In an instant, a strange atmosphere began to spread, and the mother looked even more worriedly at her daughter inside the house. However, as the second thunderclap sounded, everyone was horrified to discover that several dark shadows suddenly darted out from behind the old Taoist. Some even emerged from the surrounding walls. How come so many suddenly popped out? Shang was shocked and horrified. This feeling is very unsettling. It made him unable to help but think of the scene where he was once surrounded by a group of monsters yelling to open the door. Thinking of this, a wave of nausea surged up. Fortunately, Zhang Explode, who woke up in shock, covered his mouth. This abnormal situation naturally sparked Xiao Ye's concern. Seeing Xiao Ye's gaze, Zhang Explode felt guilty and remorseful, apologizing with a "sorry," because he felt that these injuries might have been caused by himself. Ku Liao suddenly laughed, and Master even directly pointed out, "Don't be self-righteous. These guys just came in to take shelter from the rain." However, when the disciple is in trouble, how can the master sit back and do nothing? He shouted, "Sun Explode," and then took out the mask of ancient coins. Seeing this, Zhang Explode's face immediately turned red. He no longer cared about the master always calling the wrong name, but was deeply touched beyond words. He even hesitated and asked, "Do you really want to give this treasure to me?" However, the next words from the master made him go dark. "The rent for the mask is 100 each time." Seeing the two of them in this appearance, Xiao Yi suddenly smiled with relief. But it's not a time for joking now, as those Shang have already come over. As for that old Taoist, he was naturally hit again. I saw him twisting his body while babbling and shouting something like, "Traitors deserve to die." His second performance directly left the few people in front of him speechless. But I don't know if they noticed the gradually spreading cracks on the old lady's photo frame. But at that moment, a sudden cry came from the inner room. Just then, Small Ka, that little maid, once again terrifyingly flew up. Even the shadow of Shang appeared behind the mother. Xiao Yi, who rushed over, didn't say a word and directly struck up with a palm. In an instant, the head of Shang was split in half, and the mother also fell unconscious on the ground. Xiao Yi then greeted the several Shangs on the bed. He didn't do anything else, he just advised these guys to practice goodness, and not to do evil. He started to form Madra with thunderous power in his hands, but before those Shang could react, on the side, a change occurred, and even Xiao Yi was stunned by this unexpected turn of events. As for the main hall, things are much simpler over here. Seeing Master Old Taoist Zhang Explode rushing over, his master directly slapped him across the face. So the poor old Taoist spun his body and flew out. Although the old Taoist was agile, he still managed to stabilize his body with a leap. But this did not pique the interest of the master. Instead, he signaled for Zhang Explode to watch carefully, as if he was going to give an on-site teaching. At this moment, the old Taoist pounced again. Of course, he still flicked out a slap just like before. But he added a sentence, saying that using this method to deal with a Shang attached to someone is totally useless. And the real weakness is right here, he said, as he picked up the backbreaker 3000 and stabbed towards old Taoist's temple. This blow indeed worked. Old Taoist rolled his eyes and fell down directly. Meanwhile, a Shang howled and floated out. The master did not even look and directly swung his hand for a strike. He immediately dealt with this troublemaker on the spot. Zhang Explode was also stunned by this thunderous move. At this moment, the master did not take action again, but coldly stared at the other black figures in the room, disdainfully saying, "Get lost, all of you." In the blink of an eye, those Shang all disappeared without a trace. Looking at the room, which had once again returned to calm, the expression in Zhang Explode's eyes was full of admiration for his master. Then they came to the inner room, where Xiao Yi stood quietly without saying a word. And the mother also woke up. At this moment, she was shouting Small Ka's name. Watching her daughter's face gradually turning red, the mother's heart was a bit excited. Zhang Explode asked in confusion, "How is she doing?" Xiao Yi grinned and said, "No problem." As soon as the words fell, the girl suddenly opened her eyes and called out, "Mom." Seeing this scene, Zhang Explode couldn't help but feel happy. However, the girl suddenly said that she dreamed of her grandma after waking up. Upon hearing this, Zhang Explode's expression immediately darkened. Because only they knew about the matter of this girl being possessed, it is feared that it is intricately connected to her grandmother. However, the girl suddenly smiled and said, "I dreamt that my grandmother came to rescue me." As soon as these words came out, Zhang Explode was instantly stunned. How could this be? Shouldn't it be Small Ka's grandmother, who has been harassing her all along? Actually, even Xiao Yi thought so before. But it wasn't until he yelled at those Shang that he realized what the girl's grandmother had actually done. At that moment, he seemed to have understood something. That is, Shang is just a kind of thought, and thoughts can be good or evil. After all, they were once human too. These Shang return with all kinds of thoughts, perhaps out of longing or perhaps to protect. And some just want to come back to take another look at this world where they once lived. But without exception, they cannot avoid a door, which is Shangman. So from that time on, Xiao Yi understood his mission. That is, as a Chu Wu, one cannot simply aim to eliminate Shang and Shangman. Instead, he should maintain balance, which means punishing evil and rewarding good. Just as Big Brother asked before we left this time, asking how he plans to handle the matter of Zhang Explode. At that time, he did not give a direct answer but instead told a story. That's because every time he was alone in that room, he could always hear the mournful cries coming from the jar. So he felt that maybe Chu Wu's mission was not simply that, but to find a way to restore Shangman to a normal person. Therefore, Zhang Explode, who can bring Shangman back to normal, gave him an opportunity to find the answer. Upon hearing this, Zhang Explode was touched, as he saw hope. But then, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. With so many people in the room, why did the old lady specifically attack him? Xiao Yi chuckled at the words. Don't you understand this? It's because you are Shangman. She is afraid that you are here to harm her granddaughter. This statement definitely put Zhang Explode in a very awkward situation. Later, Xiao Yi handed a piece of paper to Small Ka's mother. He said this is a Chinese herbal recipe for nourishing and invigorating qi. By using these to regulate Small Ka, he will feel better soon. Of course, it's not just that. They also need to completely eliminate the hidden dangers here. The third brother immediately understood and directly pressed his palm against the wall. In an instant, a force of lightning directly enveloped the entire building, even extending into the surrounding courtyard. In this way, this place will no longer be invaded by dirty things. Of course, Zhang Explode didn't see anything. He thought his master was just showing off. But the matter has been resolved. It's also time for them to leave. Small Ka's mother gratefully handed Xiao Yi a few large red bills, but Xiao Yi politely declined. After all, they hadn't come for nothing on this trip. Because that old Taoist seemed to have blown up a lot of equipment, and Zhang Explode was currently discussing with his master which one to take. The advice given by the master was to take them all, leaving none behind. Xiao Yi felt a bit speechless, and quickly urged them to get ready to set off, because their next destination was Yellow White Village. Of course, I don't know if Xiao Yi intentionally spoke so loudly. After Small Ka's mother heard this name, she suddenly became stunned. She looked incredulous and asked if the place they were going to was really called Yellow White Village. So, Xiao Yi's goal was achieved when he smiled and confirmed the name Yellow White Village. Small Ka's mother advised with a trembling voice, "It's better if you don't go," because their whole family escaped from that village. After learning about this hidden truth, Xiao Yi quickly called Gong Ling. At this moment, Gong Ling happened to be standing in the dark, observing every move of the people in the village. She discovered many strange things in the village, so upon receiving intelligence from Xiao Yi, she prepared to evacuate first. However, as soon as she turned around, a rustling sound came from the woods. A fierce black figure emerged slowly from the woods. Yellow White Village finally arrived. Although Small Ka's mother sincerely advised the three of them not to go to this village, they had no choice but to come. Because this village may hide a way to turn Shangman back into a normal person, this is also the place that concerns Zhang Explode the most. Episode 14, The Guide. However, such a remote village looks desolate no matter how you look at it. Could there really be such a solution? Xiao Yi is unsure but somewhat confident, because he saw that tall Ferris wheel in the distance. Upon closer inspection, this place is not far from that abandoned amusement park, which is also the place where the boy was buried 300 years ago. At this point, Xiao Yi began to have unwavering confidence in his intuition. So now, let's just take a look around for now. The only problem now is that someone has fallen behind. Xiao Yi looked at the third brother snoring loudly in the car with a helpless expression, and shouted a few times at the eighth in annoyance. However, the people in the car continued to snore, completely ignoring him. Deeply understanding the third brother's character, Xiao Yi had a sudden inspiration and muttered to himself, "Oh, it looks like he fell asleep. But hey, I heard that Yellow White Village has a gold mine. So, Zhang Explode, go to the trunk and get a shovel." In the next moment, before Zhang Explode could even take a step, he saw the master already holding the shovel, darting in front of him. Even on the way, he casually inquired about the price of gold. But at this moment, a dark figure suddenly tumbled down from the highway, shouting for the three of them to stop. They took a closer look and realized that the person who came was actually that old Taoist. When this old Taoist got closer, he suddenly fell on the ground with a thud, sweating profusely, begging everyone to help him up. What's going on? The sudden scene left several people puzzled. Could it be that this old Taoist has gone mad? Seeing the three people indifferent, old Taoist sighed and began to reveal his true identity. He said that he is not the Shangnan Celestial Master. That is just a self-proclaimed title. Because no one would hire him without a prestigious title in this line of work, he had no choice but to resort to this deception. Today, during the day, he did indeed notice that the household was hiding something dirty. So, he planned to help people drive away evil spirits and earn some money to fill his belly that had not been fed for 2 days. But he never expected that he not only lacked the skills of Shang, but also ended up being possessed by that dirty thing. So it is to blame his own dull talent. He was dull-witted since childhood and joined the sect but couldn't make progress. In the end, he was persuaded by his master to leave the mountain. Unwilling to give up, He sought knowledge everywhere, only to be deceived and exploited by a group of scoundrels, being repeatedly taken advantage of like a crop of leeks being harvested time and time again. Fortunately, today in his twilight years, he finally met a true master. He clearly remembered that the three people in front of him not only saved the little girl, but also drove away all the dirt from the house. They even rescued him, an incompetent old Taoist, from the dirt time and time again. In that moment, he had already made up his mind. When it comes to the old Taoist, he looked up at Zhang Explode standing in the middle, and directly started hugging his thigh. He spoke with tears in his eyes, hoping that the few people could take him as a disciple because he really just wanted to learn some skills to help those in need. Xiaoyi did not answer directly but asked with a smile how old Taoist knew they were there. Upon hearing this, old Taoist sighed and said he had run all the way there. Upon hearing this, Xiaoyi directly widened his eyes. Over 50 kilometers. Old Taoist ran all the way here without eating for 2 days. Quite impressive indeed. Unlike Xiaoyi's shock, the eighth, on the other hand, had a serious expression on his face. After pondering for a moment, he suddenly spoke, asking for the name of the old Taoist. Upon hearing this, the old Taoist instinctively started to introduce himself, saying, "I am the Zhongnan Celestial Master. No, I am called Ma Dijin." Unexpectedly, the eighth did not pay much attention and almost mechanically responded with a plain, "Okay." But in the next moment, he put his arm around the old Taoist's shoulder and said, starting from today, Ma Tianchuang would be his apprentice. The old Taoist was immediately confused. Ma Tianchuang? Who is that? Fortunately, the clever Zhang Explode quietly told him, "It's you." Ma Dijin suddenly realized it, immediately bowed and saluted. Of course, the ceremony of apprenticeship is indispensable. The eighth immediately gave the shovel in his hand to old Taoist Ma. Later, a group of 4 people walked towards Yellow-White Village. With Zhang Explode's introduction, he learned that the handsome guy wearing glasses was their uncle master named Xiaoyi, while the master naturally chimed in, mentioning that Zhang Explode was old Taoist's senior brother. Upon hearing this, Zhang Explode was too lazy to correct the name, and instead awkwardly told old Taoist that he had arrived not long ago. Strictly speaking, the two of them actually both became apprentices on the same day. But as they chatted, they both inexplicably fell silent because the eerily quiet surroundings. Most of the houses in the village were pitch dark, clearly uninhabited. Under a large tree next to a streetlight, a few freelancers were sitting and enjoying the cool breeze. Then a good show began with Xiaoyi taking the lead to ask for directions, claiming they were out-of-town tourists because both friends were severely carsick. They had no choice but to come here. They wanted to ask if there is a pharmacy or something similar in the village. Unexpectedly, those few people remained silent and just shook their heads repeatedly. It seems that there is no pharmacy here. Xiaoyi was not discouraged and asked again if there were any goose houses or hotels in the village that could facilitate them for the night. The group of people began to show impatience. Not only did they coldly reply, "None," they also pointed at the empty small building in front of them and said that the village is about to be demolished. Most of the people here have already left, and now there are only a few lonely elderly people left. Upon hearing this, Zhang Explode and old Taoist Ma, who were pretending to be sick, instantly woke up. Like Xiaoyi, they were all filled with questions. Didn't village chief plan to help these elderly people a little? But when he asked this, the faces of several villagers immediately darkened. Without saying a word, they got up and left, evidently not wanting to say anything more. At a glance, as Yellow-White Village and Small Cause Mother said, there are indeed significant issues here. And Xiaoyi also remembered what the Black Boss had said, that the coffin was sold to him by the village chief here. So Xiaoyi really wants to know if the current village chief still sells coffins. Since the villagers are unwilling to help, we can only rely on everyone's abilities to find the village chief's home. However, they just got ready to dive deep into the village when they noticed something was amiss. He suddenly turned around and only then did he discover that under a dark building, there was a person who looked like a miner standing there. In shock, he quickly patted Xiaoyi on the shoulder. But in fact, the miner Xiaoyi had noticed it long ago, and he also knew that it was a Shang that had been following them for several minutes. Upon hearing this, Zhang Explode hesitated and asked, "What does he want by following us?" Unexpectedly, Xiaoyi joked, "I don't know. Why don't you go ask him?" Zhang Explode was immediately startled and dared not engage with this thing. What is unexpected is that the miner suddenly lifted his arm and pointed in a direction. This move made several people stunned. Could this Shang be guiding them? Following the direction pointed out by the miner, they saw a small hill and a small courtyard. At the surprise of everyone, the miner suddenly turned around and walked towards the direction he had pointed out, clearly indicating that he was leading the way. But he took only 2 steps and suddenly disappeared into thin air. Then, they saw a few people emerge from the darkness, looking like they were carrying something. Leading them was a bald, middle-aged man, with his round face and big ears. He appeared to have some authority. So Xiaoyi greeted them with a wave. But at that moment, several villagers who were carrying things shouted something to the bald man, maybe something about the last box being moved. Xiaoyi was able to hear clearly this time. It said that there's no labor too difficult when the right approach is taken. After sending the villagers away, the bald village chief turned to look at the few people in front of him and asked what they wanted to know. After confirming the identity of the village chief in front of him, Xiaoyi planned to ask the question that was on his mind. Before he could speak, the village chief's expression changed. He stared at Xiaoyi behind him with a look of shock. Seeing this scene, Xiaoyi and the others immediately felt that something was wrong because a terrifying black shadow had appeared on the ground. Shocked, they turned around to take a look. Only then did they realize that a terrifying figure had appeared behind them at some point. Looking at Zhang Explode's tall stature, a sudden question popped into their mind. Has this guy ever considered playing basketball with his height? Fortunately, this giant of a man remained silent and simply pushed aside a few people before walking past. Unbeknownst to them, he turned out to be the son of the village chief. And the bald village chief looked on, with a worried expression, concerned for his son encountering any danger in the darkness. Suddenly, he saw a large bloodstain on his son's elbow and immediately shouted in alarm. Little did he know, his son coldly said, "It's not my blood." But when the son returned, the village chief couldn't be bothered with the people in front of him anymore. Instead, he turned around and pulled his son back home. However, even though the scene just now was very strange, it still left Xiaoyi and the other person with psychological shadows. Because just now neither of them noticed when the big guy actually came up behind them. At this moment, old Taoist seemed to have discovered something strange. He turned around and stared at the small mountain and the houses below, furrowing his brow, and muttered something didn't seem right. Xiaoyi, curious about what was said, wanted to see what old Taoist had discovered. Old Taoist was still lost in thought, saying that there were major problems with the house in front of him. Several people couldn't help but furrow their brows in confusion. A silent mountain village, peculiar villagers, ghosts pointing the way, and a terrifying giant. The series of bizarre events they encountered made the nearby yellow-white village appear more mysterious. Through the clues provided by Small Ka's mother, it can be learned that the name Yellow-White Village comes from a small mountain behind the village, Mountain Yellow-White, where a gold mine has existed since ancient times. However, this is not the root of the strangeness. What really concerns her is the house of the village chief, as it is directly built right at the foot of the mountain. Therefore, at this moment, old Taoist Ma couldn't help but be stunned after seeing the layout here. According to common sense, the house should never have been built here. Even someone with a bit of intelligence would not do such a thing. Therefore, he was already convinced that the village chief's house was highly problematic. Chapter 15: Infiltration. Upon hearing these words, Xiaoyi curiously asked, "Why?" Old Taoist explained, "In traditional feng shui, mountains govern people, while water governs wealth. A favorable layout places a bright hall, an open space in front, and a mountain at the back, symbolizing a solid backing or support. The rear mountain acts as a guardian, shielding the home from harsh winds, gathering auspicious qi, and ensuring the prosperity of the household. Therefore, most houses are usually built facing a mountain. He mentioned that there was an issue with the village chief's house because the front entrance of the house directly faces the mountain. The saying, "opening the door to face a mountain," symbolizes obstruction. It is thought to block the flow of vital energy, hindering auspicious energy circulation and causing negative energy to accumulate. This is considered a significant taboo in traditional feng shui practice. Old Taoist looked at the house in front of him again, then pointed to the small mountain in front of the house and said, "On this mountain peak trees grow, surrounded by walls on all four sides, and there are many cliffs, caves, and stone chambers on the mountain." This means that when a mountain fails to contain its qi and merely takes on a mountainous shape, this situation leads to the accumulation of yin energy, which in turn breeds harmful influences, known as cha. Furthermore, this mountain has steep peaks, soaring high, with scant soil and abundant rocks, sharp scales, and a rugged appearance without elegance. Therefore, in feng shui theory, such a mountain is referred to as a Tanlang greedy wolf, a form associated with misfortune and disruptive forces. Upon hearing this description, Xiao Yi couldn't help but exclaim, "So fierce!" And the eighth didn't care about that. He bluntly stated that this was feudal superstition. Upon hearing the assessment from Master Taoist, Old Taoist immediately bowed and smiled, explaining that this was traditional culture. But Zhang Explode suddenly became excited because he found something in the distant dense forest. Surprised, everyone turned their heads to look, but saw nothing. However, as they approached, they finally discovered. Under the foot of the mountain stands a statue unexpectedly, and in the hands of the statue, there is a stone tablet inscribed with the words, "Ascend to Immortality." But when they looked down, they found that the inscription on the stone tablet below was about the deeds of kindness of the Qing dynasty divine doctor, Zheng Qingshan. "It's just that I haven't heard much about this divine doctor's name." The eighth's way of thinking is quite unique. He asked as if he had seen a treasure, "Will this thing be demolished along with the village?" Old Taoist felt a bit puzzled and subconsciously replied, "I don't think so." But his master's next question took a sharp turn. "Do you know this divine Dr. Shang?" Old Taoist quickly shook his head. "Just kidding. How could I possibly know someone from 100 years ago?" He was simply curious. Just a doctor, so why would the villagers turn him into a deity-like figure? No one can truly understand this point. Just then, Xiao Ye's phone suddenly rang. No need to think, it was basically a call from the temple. However, the voice coming from the other end of the phone surprised him, because his big brother actually asked him if Gong Ling was with them. Upon hearing this, Xiao Yi secretly thought that he was in trouble. He remembered clearly that after he informed Gong Ling of the intelligence, she had mentioned about preparing to return, and even sent over the coordinates of Yellow White Village. In this case, it seems that Gong Ling didn't encounter any danger at that time. But why hasn't she returned to the temple until now? After hearing this, the uncle remained silent for a moment and then said, "Be careful," before hanging up the phone. Xiao Ye's expression turned cold, and at this moment, it started to drizzle. He repeatedly dialed Gong Ling's phone number, but each time it just repeated the message that the call could not be connected. So, he remembered the tall figure and the blood-stained mask he had encountered before. He also vividly remembers that the tall figure said, "It's not my own blood." If this is not his blood, whose blood could it be? Thinking of this, Xiao Yi felt a bit uneasy in his heart. He immediately went up the mountain, saying he wanted to check the situation. At the same time, he also told everyone not to move from this place, and to wait for him to come back. However, Xiao Yi had just left the village chief's house when there was a commotion, only to see the tall man suddenly walking out. Apparently something had happened, and the bald village chief followed him out with a look of blame on his face, obviously intending to go together. This kind of situation is naturally seen clearly by Zhang Explode and the others, but he is unaware that Master has already come up with a bold plan at this moment. Since the village chief and his son have already left, does that mean that there is no one in the house at the moment? Thinking of this, he didn't say a word and just shouted, "Let's go!" So the group started climbing over the wall. Zhang Explode looked worried, thinking that this would be breaking the law. Unexpectedly, the master didn't care and just said to keep a low profile and not get caught. However, Zhang Explode was worried about more than that, because if they left, what would happen if Xiao Yi came back and couldn't find them? Little did the master consider this point, because he knew that Xiao Yi was the best at finding people. However, when they successfully climbed into the courtyard, they were stunned by the scene before them, because there was a second wall in front of them. Luckily, this second wall was not closed. Old Taoist took the lead, shouting some broken English, and led everyone through. "Okay, let's go, 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 go! Are you playing CS?" As expected, the room was pitch black inside, indicating that there was probably no one there. The eighth didn't care about this, and directly started preparing to enter the room. Zhang Explode was suddenly startled and hastily stopped his master. He wanted to figure out the purpose of everyone barging into the village chief's house like this. Upon hearing this, the eighth suddenly furrowed his brows, because he thought of the scene where the tall guy suddenly appeared behind him previously. At this moment, he wanted to figure something out. However, just as he was about to push the door, old Taoist suddenly shouted to stop him. He was puzzled by this. Why were these two disciples so troublesome? Old Taoist stared straight at the courtyard door behind him, then suddenly ran back. The eighth was puzzled by this scene and called out, "Ma Chima, what are you doing?" But old Taoist ignored him, and instead looked outside through the crack in the door. As soon as old Taoist took a look, he was immediately scared out of his wits. He looked as if he had discovered something extremely terrifying, trembling and falling to the ground. The eerie scene startled the two of them, and they quickly ran over. But the old Taoist suddenly sat up, with a sullen face, revealing his discovery, because he had already figured out why the village chief's house was built here. Previously, they had seen that the village chief's house had two walls surrounding it. If you add a door, it will be equivalent to having 3 doors. In feng shui theory, this configuration is referred to as the 3 gates layout. The first gate opens to the sky, a glimpse of heaven. The second gate reveals a mountain, a symbol of earthly anchoring. But the third gate, it opens to the realm of the immortals. Clearly, the owner of this residence aspires not just to dwell in the world, but to transcend it, to become an immortal. Machima said with a very dark expression. At this moment, Xiao Yi was still dialing Gong Ling's phone repeatedly. He hoped to find Gong Ling's trace in the mountains. Just then, a broken tree trunk not far away caught his attention. Beside it, there were also some splattered bloodstains. He squatted down with a gloomy expression, wiped off a bit of blood, and smelled it at the tip of his nose. At that moment, his heart was extremely uneasy, because he knew that during the day, he had just advised Gong Ling not to act due to lack of rest. At that time, Gong Ling also said that she was only collecting information, which slightly reassured him. But the current situation has made him deeply regret his decision during the day. So he could only silently pray that Gong Ling would be safe. But what he didn't expect was that at this moment, a faint light was slowly approaching. He did not turn around, but he knew who had come. So he turned around and asked, "Have you seen Gong Ling?" The miner like Shang remained silent, quietly gesturing in a direction as if to say, "Over there." Today is just the first day that Zhang Explode has taken an apprentice, but he did not expect that on the same evening the master took him and the newly accepted junior brother to break into a residential house at night. So is this a case of the master's moral corruption or disregard for the law? However, the main reason the master came up with this idea is that he saw the opportunity. At this moment, the village chief's house is empty, and he has a long-standing question in his heart. But what he didn't expect was that when he sneaked into the main hall with his two disciples, he found that the huge room was completely empty. How could this be the case? Zhang Explode, who saw the scene, was also somewhat puzzled. At this moment, he didn't care about how empty the room was, but was more concerned about the purpose of his master's silence as he broke into the private residence. Unexpectedly, the master did not answer, but instead pointed the backbreaker 3000 at the center of his forehead. It seemed like he was sensing something. Just then, the master's eyes suddenly lit up, as if he had activated some kind of secret technique. After a moment, he told Zhang Explode the purpose of this trip. He wanted to find out what that big guy really was. Zhang Explode was surprised to hear this, because the word, person, was not mentioned in the master's statement. Chapter 16, Remains, was just at this moment. Old Taoist Ma suddenly rushed over. He hurriedly asked his master to catch up, saying that he had made a special discovery. Because he had already speculated earlier that the house built by the village chief was for becoming immortal. In that case, there must be some mystery hidden in this house, so he carefully searched every corner. As expected, he did find something peculiar. A group of people arrived at a room that was originally locked, but inside, there was a set of stairs leading downwards. Zhang Explode looked inside, but could only see darkness. It seemed to be a very deep tunnel. Old Taoist added that this tunnel was originally sealed off by two adjacent stone slabs. He also tried to assess them, and found the slabs to be incredibly heavy, likely requiring a crane to lift. Therefore, he concluded that the secret of this house lies within this tunnel. In that case, let's explore it. Upon hearing this, the master immediately took the lead and walked in. Old Taoist is fully equipped and also carries a flashlight with him. This way, we won't have to feel our way in the dark. The tunnel is very long, and there is a faint sound of water dripping. However, even though Master and Old Taoist Ma have always been by Zhang Explode's side, he still feels an increasingly strong chill. He began to shiver uncontrollably, and even his teeth started to chatter. Zhang Explode was a bit puzzled because even when feeling nervous or scared, he wouldn't show it so obviously. Even more strangely, within these emotions, he also felt a hint of excitement. Master didn't pay attention to these, but instead poked his forehead with the backbreaker 3000 again, then instructed his two disciples to follow him closely, and to obey his commands no matter what happens. Then he took the lead and walked towards the depths of the underground passage. As he walked, Zhang Explode suddenly remembered what Xiaoyi had said, which was that he believed in Chu Wu's intuition. So, could the strange feeling he had just now also be Shangman's intuition? Or perhaps, it was the excitement of finding a way to return to normalcy. However, these emotions are ultimately just wishful thinking. It's better to first understand the tunnel in front of you. Old Taoist estimated after hearing this, he felt that this tunnel should lead to the direction of Mountain Yellow White. Zhang Explode was somewhat shocked after hearing this, but the master suddenly said, "Right," because a railway track had appeared in front of them. It appears that this tunnel may have been an old mine shaft. I estimate that village chief secretly connected the mine tunnel to his house in order to transport gold without anyone knowing. As the three of them walked and talked, they were suddenly stunned by what they saw before their eyes. Because before them stood a huge archway. When this thing appeared, even Old Taoist could not remain calm. Although he had read many books, he had never seen such a thing before. But just then, Old Taoist suddenly exclaimed again. He pointed ahead and shouted to the master to hurry over because there were steps leading upwards here. The master stared at the darkness above and quietly activated a secret technique. The next moment, he said confidently, "It's up there!" Zhang Explode found this statement somewhat inexplicable. The master always leaves his sentences half-finished, which can be very frustrating. But just as he had finished speaking, Zhang Explode felt something strange under his feet. He looked down and discovered a puddle of water had appeared at some point without him noticing. It's strange. Everything was fine just now. How did water suddenly appear on the ground? Just as they were stunned, a loud rumbling sound suddenly came from the direction of the stairs. And in the next moment, they saw a surging flood rushing towards them. Horrified, the master hurriedly shouted for them to run quickly. However, they had not run a few steps before being caught up by the flood. The situation was critical, and the three of them couldn't care about much. They had to swim hard along the water flow. The master's backbreaker 3000 was long enough, so he grabbed onto the nearby rock wall in the chaos. Once he stabilized his posture, he began yelling the names of the two disciples. Unlike before, this time he shouted the names with incredible accuracy. At that moment, old Taoist was swept over by the current, and the master immediately reached out and grabbed him. He even let the backbreaker 3000 be washed away in order to free up his hand. Zhang Explode is not optimistic at the moment. He has sunk into the water, looking at the dim light above his head. He feels it is like an insurmountable gap. He struggles to swim upstream, but the distance seems to be getting farther and farther away. At the same time, he seems to see his former relatives and friends. The sudden emotional fluctuation caused him to choke on water, unable to catch his breath. Just as he was about to give up, a familiar big hand suddenly pulled him up. With the help of this force, Zhang Explode finally surfaced. But when he looked back, he found that the flood water was still surging around him, with no one else in sight. Could it be that he was experiencing an illusion? Unable to figure it out, he could only swim hard towards the shallow bank to take a breath. But at this moment, he suddenly remembered his master and old Taoist Ma. Zhang Explode was suddenly drenched in cold sweat. He quickly turned around to look, but he couldn't see a single shadow of a person. Just then, he saw a red wooden hand floating on the side. That was his master's personal belonging that he never let out of his sight. At that moment, Zhang Explode panicked. An inexplicable force suddenly surged, and he plunged back into the water without hesitation. Fortunately, not long after, he saw his master's shadow. Seeing that his master seemed to have drowned, without thinking, he immediately grabbed his master's arm and pulled him out of the water. It wasn't until he dragged his master to safety that he realized he was somewhat exhausted. But the current state of the master can hardly be considered a successful rescue. After calling out several times, Zhang Explode realized that the master was still motionless. In anxiety, he hurriedly leaned over to feel the master's heartbeat. Then he immediately started pressing on the master's chest. Not sure if it was due to his own nervousness, Zhang Explode did not hear the master's heartbeat. So at that moment, his heart was filled with despair. He did not want to see anyone else die because of him. What's more, the person before his eyes knew that he was a jinx, yet still insisted on taking him as a disciple, a kind master. Zhang Explode had prayed in his heart no less than 10,000 times, hoping that his master would not die. So, at the next moment, a jet of water shot into his eyes. Great! The master has reacted. But before he could get excited, the master gave him a disdainful look and said angrily, "The heart is on the left side." But at this moment, Zhang Explode didn't care about these things, because as long as the master was fine, it was all that mattered. Thinking of this, he happily pressed a few more times, causing the master to grimace in pain. But just at this moment, a familiar voice suddenly came from behind, reassuring Zhang Explode not to worry. Zhang Explode quickly turned around and saw Xiao Yi sitting not far away, with junior brother old Taoist Ma by his side. Xiao Yi was seen smiling as he said, "We are the people you cannot defeat." But Zhang Explode seemed to have not heard Xiao Yi's words at all. He called out Xiao Yi's name with a trembling voice, as if he had seen a loved one. Unfortunately, he didn't know how to be sentimental, so he could only ask Xiao Yi why she was here. Xiao Yi smiled without saying a word, raised her hand, and pointed behind Zhang Explode, saying that someone had led her the way. Zhang Explode turned around, and only then did he realize that a miner was standing behind him. He remembered that the miner was actually Shang, the one who wanted to lead them earlier. But why did he want to bring Xiaoyi here? Before Zhang Explode could ask clearly, the suddenly awakened old Taoist suddenly exclaimed. Because he found that not far in front of him, there was actually a foot, or more precisely, a leather boot. This discovery made several people couldn't help but become serious. Unintentionally, they all recalled the accident Small Ka's mother had told them about. She said that about 10 years ago, there was an accident at the mine in Yellow White Village. At that time, the mine was flooded by underground water, causing many miners to drown. The village chief, however, used money to grease the wheels and cover up the incident. Not only did he silence the families of the deceased miners, but he also coerced and tempted other miners to continue working underground. It was at that time that Small Ka's mother and her family managed to escape from the village. To her knowledge, the bodies of those miners who died in the accident have still not been found. However, what Zhang Explode and the other 3 people are facing now is dozens of skeletons and remains in front of them. They fell silent, as if mourning for the deceased. Zhang Explode looked at the surging groundwater behind him and had a bad guess in his heart. And at this moment, Xiaoyi also saw through it with a single sentence. It seems that someone wants to bury us here in the same way. Who exactly is that person? The sudden underground water backflow in the mine is remarkably similar to the incident 10 years ago. This eerie situation is not difficult to guess. Someone must be pulling the strings behind the scenes. However, this time, they were able to survive due to the help of Shang, who has been silently guiding them. Perhaps this is also driven by a certain obsession he holds, hoping that one day, both himself and the deceased brothers can see the light of day and clear their names. But he did not expect that this persistence would last for 10 years. And now, he doesn't have much time left in this world. Looking at the dozens of corpses in front of him, everyone's hearts felt as if a huge stone had been placed upon them. Even old Taoist, who was originally panic-stricken, could not contain his anger, bluntly stating that the village chief was deeply sinful. Just, if it's really the village chief's doing, what is his purpose? And what's the point of senselessly drowning so many miners? The more I think about episode 17, Zhang Explode, the angrier I get. Not to mention that the village chief has so many lives on his hands. Just now, the behavior of wanting to drown them in the mine is unforgivable. So Zhang Explode immediately shouted to go out and report to the police, hoping to bring the culprits to justice. Old Taoist nodded slightly and firmly said one word. Agreed. Seeing the 2 disciples full of fighting spirit, the 8th didn't bother to interrupt them. He turned his head and asked Xiaoyi what he had done in the mountains earlier. Xiaoyi did not hide his worries and spoke about the inexplicable disappearance of Gongling. At the moment of hearing this, the 8th's pupils suddenly contracted, but in an instant, he returned to his usual languid state. He held up the backbreaker 3000 and gave Xiaoyi a reasonable analysis that there was no signal in the mountains or his phone was out of battery. He even said, it could also be that he's racing, and it's inconvenient to answer the phone. At this point, he hesitated and glanced at Xiaoyi, adding the last point. It could simply be that he doesn't want to answer your call. But after saying this, he immediately became serious again and said, you don't need to overthink it. After all, she is Gongling, the queen of Lisong Temple. Indeed, this reason is irrefutable. Xiaoyi paused for a moment, then immediately put on a happy expression as if he had suddenly realized something, which also pleased the 8th greatly. Joy is always interrupted by someone. I saw Zhang explode in a panic, shouting about the failure of the eradication plan. Nothing else, just because they were trapped in the mine and couldn't get out. As for swimming back from the water, that is simply impossible. Do you mean we have to climb out from above? Unexpectedly, Xiaoyi smiled and said that they couldn't leave yet because before they left, they needed to figure out this mountain first. Looking at Xiaoyi with a carefree expression, it seems like escaping from the mine is just a piece of cake for him. Speaking of this, Xiaoyi suddenly turned around and asked if the 8th had sensed something. In fact, the eighth has always been sensitive to this kind of thing. He pointed across the river and said that what he sensed was right ahead. And the upward stone steps they initially saw also lead to this place. Just that there is a cliff in front of them. How can they pass? The eighth mumbled with his chin propped up. Do we have to order takeout for something explosive? Like a bomb? Just as they were pondering, the old Taoist on the side started shouting and screaming again. Turns out, he found the long board that he had been carrying on his back all along. Previously, he had been wrapping this object in cloth all the time. Those who didn't know might have thought he was carrying a mysterious heavy ruler. Now that it's unwrapped, it's revealed to contain 5 spade-shaped tools. The old Taoist, looking proud, introduces them, saying he has had some experience with the art of tomb robbing, and that these tools are his trusty weapons for moving mountains. Upon hearing this, both Xiao Yi and the eighth involuntarily furrowed their brows. But in the next moment, they, along with Zhang Explode, turned into old Taoist's cheerleading squad. They watched as old Taoist transformed into a human-shaped tunnel boring machine, quickly drilling a large hole into the mountain wall in front of them. Before them was a vast expanse of stalactites, resembling a spacious natural cave. The eighth obviously did not have time to pay attention to these. He stared straight ahead. He said that he felt what he sensed was right there. So, the words, sensing, with a closed mouth really troubled little Explode. Isn't sensing something only found in fantasy novels? What's going on with you guys? Little Explode Xiao Yi, who has once again turned into a curious baby, smiled. He explained that their sensors mainly detect Shang filth. Hearing this, Zhang Explode was even more confused. Shang filly? Are there still such things hidden in the mind? Of course, Xiao Yi was unaware of Zhang Explode's misunderstanding, and continued to explain on his own. He said that this, Shang filth, is the unique energy possessed by the Shang or Shangman. Usually, the stronger the concept of Shang, the more intense the Shang filth will be. Unfortunately, no matter how strong the Shang filth is, it will eventually be destroyed by the sunlight. So even if it possesses a human body, Shang dare not come out during the day, just like the miner who just led the way for them. Its Shang filth is already very weak and almost non-existent. This is also why Xiao Yi previously said that its time is running out, because once the Shang filth is gone, it will completely disappear. And Chu Wu is used to perceive the existence of Shang and Shangman based on Shang filth. Upon hearing this explanation, Zhang Explode finally had some understanding, but he didn't expect that even he would have Shang filth. Later, he understood from Xiao Yi's mouth where Shangman's Shang filth came from. That is, every time Shangman releases Shang to the outside world, a large amount of Shang filth is also produced. And the amount of Shang filth generated during Shang ascension is even more terrifying. So these are the main reasons why Shangman is extremely dangerous. Speaking of this, Xiao Yi's expression suddenly darkened. He said that deep in the mountain yellow-white area, there is a place where extremely strong Shang filth exists. At that moment, the eighth suddenly reached out to stop him. He gestured for everyone to be silent and stop moving. Because not far in front of him, there was a figure of a person mining. This scene startled a few people, and they quickly hid and watched from a distance. Zhang Explode asked somewhat hesitantly, "Is this the Shang who led us here before?" Xiao Yi shook his head, his eyes showing a hint of hostility. And the eighth was very bold at this moment. He quietly snuck behind the shadow, grabbed the backbreaker 3000, and patted the miner on the shoulder. Unexpectedly, the miner suddenly seemed to lose consciousness and fell straight to the ground. It was not until this moment that they discovered the miner was just a dead body. If their guess is correct, then this corpse must be one of the miners who perished 10 years ago. But how could a corpse move? And not only that, but also continue to repeat the mining work day after day for 10 years. It is truly puzzling. However, Xiao Yi suddenly squatted down and directly reached out to pull apart the corpse's hair. Sure enough, there was indeed a shiny golden object in the corpse's temple. He didn't expect that someone would embed gold in the temple of a corpse. Xiao Yi stood up solemnly and tossed the gold ingot to the eighth because there was a special energy inside. The eighth's eyes widened in astonishment as he sensed a trace of Shang filth in it. Xiao Yi was also unsure about it. In fact, they found the same gold coins when they buried the boy, Shangman, earlier. At that time, they also thought that these Shang filth might have been infected due to long-term contact with the Shang. But now, upon further examination, this assumption seems to have become somewhat inaccurate. Does that mean that Shang filth originally existed within the gold? This speculation made Little Explode widen his eyes in shock once again. What's going on? Didn't you just say that Shang filth only exists within Shang or Shangman's body? How could the gold possibly carry Shang filth? Could it be that someone intentionally injected it in? This unintentional question startled Xiao Yi, as if discovering something extraordinary. And the eighth, after listening, also rebuked with a sentence. Don't talk nonsense! Because he thought this was absolutely impossible. After a few people observed a moment of silence for the deceased, they continued to walk towards the cave. But as soon as they walked out of the cave, they were shocked by the scene in front of them. They didn't expect to find more dead miners, who had worked tirelessly day and night at this place. The faces of the crowd turned grim, as it was unforgivable for anyone of any status to commit such evil deeds. The eighth got angry and angrily asked, "What the hell is going on?" This questioning echoed in the spacious cave, but unfortunately only a few people around could hear it. Only these distressed individuals in front of me are left. Perhaps the eighth is asking not only about the mastermind behind the events, but also questioning the state of the world today. At this moment, the sense of connection is growing stronger. Perhaps the answer for Mountain Yellow White is right ahead. I don't know why old Daoist suddenly started coughing, which made Zhang Explode a little worried. And for these two new disciples, the eighth also solemnly warned them to keep up with him. He also said that if they encounter any sudden emergencies later, they shouldn't worry about anything else and just run first. Upon hearing this, Zhang felt uneasy but did not speak up. Before long, they followed the miners. To be continued.